Why are there so many of them in the priority boarding area? Do not they know their place? The woman's cutting whisper sliced through the general hum of Gate 42B at JFK International Airport, causing several heads to turn and faces to darken with disapproval. The terminal was packed with the particular brand of controlled chaos that defined modern air travel. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over weary travelers sprawled across rows of uncomfortable seating. The smell of burnt coffee from the nearby kiosk mingled with the antiseptic scent of industrial cleaning products and a hint of anxiety. Delta Airlines Flight 237 to London Heathrow was now officially delayed by 45 minutes. The digital board had just updated, triggering a collective groan from the waiting passengers. Business travelers checked watches and made frustrated calls. Families tried to distract increasingly restless children, and solo travelers slumped deeper into their devices, resigned to their fate. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a gleaming Boeing 777 sat at the gate, tantalizing in its massive, immobile presence. Ground crew scurried around it like ants servicing a sleeping giant. The June sky beyond was turning a deepening shade of blue, as evening approached the kind of perfect flying conditions that made the delay all the more irritating. The gate attendant's voice crackled over the PA system, her practiced tone of apology doing little to soothe the collective frustration. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay of Delta Flight 237 to London Heathrow. We are currently awaiting the arrival of connecting passengers from Chicago. We expect to begin boarding in approximately 30 minutes. We appreciate your patience." No one looked patient. A businessman in a rumpled suit paced near the windows, his Bluetooth headset blinking as he gesticulated to an unseen colleague. A young couple sat on the floor against the wall, sharing earbuds and leaning into each other. A mother tried to entertain twin toddlers with a picture book, her face a mask of exhaustion. And then there was the woman at the counter, the one who had just made her prejudiced whisper audible enough for nearby passengers to hear. She stood out not just because of her volume, but because of her immaculate appearance amidst the travel-worn masses. Her silver blonde hair was swept into a perfect chignon, not a strand out of place. Her cream-colored Chanel suit looked as though it had just been pressed, the gold buttons gleaming under the terminal lights. A Hermes scarf in vibrant blue draped artfully around her neck, and diamonds glinted from her ears and wrists as she gesticulated at the gate agent. "This is the third announcement," she continued, her voice carrying across the gate area. "First it was 20 minutes, then 30, and now 45. Do you people have any idea what you are doing? I have a schedule to keep important people waiting for me in London." The gate agent maintained a professional smile, but her eyes had glazed over with the particular 1,000-yard stare of someone who had heard it all before. Victoria Blackwell checked her Rolex for the 12th time in half as many minutes. The diamonds encircling the watch face caught the fluorescent light winking back at her like tiny conspirators. At 52, Victoria had mastered the art of aging expensively. Her face had the taut, smooth quality that spoke of regular visits to Manhattan's most exclusive dermatologists and plastic surgeons, not enough to look artificial, just enough to look well-rested and refreshed, as her society friends would say. Stepping away from the counter with a final withering glance at the gate agent, Victoria returned to her strategically chosen seat, one with a clear view of the boarding door and sufficient distance from the masses. Her Louis Vuitton carry-on sat on the seat beside her, an effective barrier against anyone who might consider sitting near her. 2 matching suitcases stood guard at her feet, the interlocking LV monogram announcing her status to anyone who cared to notice. She pulled out her phone and dialed with manicured fingers. Thomas. "This is absolute madness," she said without preamble when her husband answered. "The incompetence is staggering. Now they are saying 45 minutes. She listened briefly. "No, I cannot miss it. The Harrington Welleses are hosting the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. It is crucial I am there to smooth things over after that ridiculous email from Lady Diana." Victoria lowered her voice, though not enough to prevent nearby passengers from hearing. Yes, I know she is important to the family, but really these people and their constant talk of social justice. We are giving them access to New York real estate royalty. Is not that enough? Eliza could have married anyone, and we are bending over backwards for these people. She sighed dramatically, eyeing a family that had edged too close to her seating area. The mother caught Victoria's glare and steered her children in another direction. The wedding is 3 days away, Thomas. 3 days until our daughter marries into one of the oldest families in British aristocracy. Everything needs to be perfect. She paused, listening. Of course, James is a catch. Oxford-educated heir to the Harrington Wells shipping fortune and that lovely estate in Kent. This is what we have worked for Thomas. What Victoria did not say, what she did not need to say to Thomas, who understood implicitly, was that this wedding represented the culmination of a lifetime of careful social engineering. Victoria had not just raised a daughter, she had crafted an asset. Eliza had been guided through the right schools, the right summer programs, the right social circles, all with an eye toward this exact outcome. The Blackwells' considerable wealth from New York real estate was new money by British standards. This marriage would grant them the one thing their money could not buy directly: heritage legitimacy, true social standing. Like a pilot navigating through turbulent skies, Victoria had charted every aspect of Eliza's trajectory, from her education at exclusive private schools to her carefully curated study abroad experiences in countries where she might accidentally encounter the right sort of European aristocrats. Even Eliza's apparent rebellion, her insistence on attending art school rather than pursuing a more practical degree, had been subtly guided by Victoria, who recognized the cultural capital such training would provide in elite social circles. Now a 45-minute delay was threatening to unravel Victoria's carefully orchestrated arrival in London. The Harrington Wellses valued punctuality almost as much as they valued their centuries-old bloodline. Yes, I am in business class. Of course, she continued into the phone, her voice carrying that particular blend of irritation and superiority. I am not an animal, Thomas. She glanced around the waiting area with thinly veiled disgust. You should see what they are letting into airports these days. Everyone looks unwashed. A mother trying to soothe a fussy infant caught Victoria's eye and quickly looked away, her cheeks coloring slightly. Victoria felt a flash of satisfaction at the woman's discomfort. Anyway, I will call when I land. The Harrington Wellses are sending a car to Heathrow. She emphasized the name loud enough for those around her to hear. It was important that people understood the caliber of her connections. Have you spoken to Eliza today? Is she nervous? Tell her Mummy is on her way. This wedding will be the event of the season. Victoria ended the call and dropped the phone into her Birkin bag, a limited edition piece in a subtle shade of burgundy that had cost more than a year's salary for most people at the gate. She smoothed her skirt, unnecessarily perfect already, and caught sight of her reflection in the darkened window. She allowed herself a small smile of approval. Despite the travel, despite the delay, despite the indignities of modern air travel, Victoria Blackwell looked exactly as someone of her station should: immaculate, untouchable, superior. The boarding area continued to fill with travelers. Victoria shifted in her seat, pulling her bags closer. 45 more minutes in this purgatory of ordinary people. She could endure it, she told herself. After all, on the other side awaited her crowning achievement, becoming mother-in-law to aristocracy. The cheerful chatter of children broke through Victoria's self-satisfaction like an unwelcome alarm. She glanced up to see a family of 4 approaching her seating area. The parents were both in their early 40s, stylishly dressed in a way that spoke of money but not ostentation. The father, tall, with olive skin and salt and pepper hair at the temples, wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that even Victoria's critical eye had to acknowledge was of excellent quality. The mother, slender and elegant in tailored slacks and a silk blouse, had her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, minimal makeup accentuating her natural beauty. But it was the children who were making the noise. a boy of about 10, and a girl who looked around 8, both practically vibrating with excitement. "Mama, can we get the window seats on the plane?" the girl asked, her voice carrying. "I want to see when we are above the clouds." "Sophia, we will see what seats we have when we board," the mother replied in accented but perfect English. "Remember, we need to be patient." "Dad, how fast does the plane go?" the boy asked, his eyes wide. "Is it faster than your Tesla?" The father laughed, a warm sound that drew smiles from nearby passengers, all except Victoria, who pressed her lips together in displeasure. "Much faster, Daniel," he replied. "About 10 times faster, actually." Dr. Garcia. A young man in hospital scrubs approached, looking slightly starstruck. "I am sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say I attended your lecture at Columbia last month on minimally invasive cardiac procedures. It was brilliant." The woman smiled warmly. "Thank you. Are you doing your residency at Presbyterian?" "Yes, 2nd year," the young doctor replied eagerly. "Your techniques have already changed how we approach certain procedures." "That is wonderful to hear. Keep in touch, we are always looking for promising residents." As the young doctor walked away, Victoria could not help but overhear the husband's proud words to his wife. "Even on vacation you are changing lives, Elena." Dr. Elena Garcia smiled modestly. "It is nice to be recognized, but I am just ready for 2 weeks of family time. The hospital can survive without me." Michael Garcia checked his watch. "Should be boarding soon, at least business class." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. These people were in business class. She surveyed them again. The clothes were right, certainly. The Garcias had the polished look of successful professionals. But the children, those loud, exuberant children in business class, was supposed to be a sanctuary for people like her, not a playground. The Garcia family settled into seats not far from Victoria's. The children, while excited, were actually well-behaved, speaking in what most would consider reasonable voices. But to Victoria, their presence was an intrusion, their happiness an affront. She shifted in her seat, pulling her Louis Vuitton carry-on closer, as though the family's obvious joy might somehow be contagious. The girl, Sophia, dropped her small backpack, and it slid slightly toward Victoria's carefully arranged luggage fortress. Victoria moved her feet quickly, as though avoiding contamination. Dr. Garcia noticed and gave Victoria an apologetic smile. Victoria did not return it. Delta Airlines Flight 237 to London Heathrow is now ready for pre-boarding. We invite our passengers requiring special assistance and families with small children to board at this time. The announcement sent a ripple of movement through the gate area. The Garcia children jumped up excitedly, but their mother gently pulled them back. "Not yet, niños. We are business class. They will call us next." Victoria gathered her belongings, standing ready. She smoothed her skirt again unnecessarily and positioned herself strategically near the priority boarding lane ahead of where the line would naturally form. Business class was always called after pre-boarding, and Victoria was determined to be first. "We now invite our Delta One and first-class passengers to board through Lane 1. Victoria moved immediately, cutting in front of an elderly couple who had also risen for priority boarding. She did not make eye contact as she swept past them, her Louis Vuitton luggage trailing behind her like obedient pets. "Boarding pass, please," the gate agent said, her expression neutral, but her eyes taking in Victoria's aggressive positioning. Victoria handed over her boarding pass with 2 manicured fingers. The agent scanned it, and the machine gave an affirming beep. "Thank you, Ms. Blackwell. Enjoy your flight." Victoria nodded curtly and proceeded down the jet bridge, the sound of her Manolo Blahnik heels echoing on the metal flooring. Behind her, she could hear the Garcia family being welcomed aboard the children's excited whispers carrying in the enclosed space. Entering the aircraft, Victoria was greeted by a flight attendant with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard. Turn right for business class seat 3A is on your left." Victoria made her way to her window seat, noticing with dismay that the aisle seat across from her 3B was already occupied. A black man in his late 30s sat there, focused intently on his laptop. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subtle blue tie. His fingers moved rapidly over the keyboard, and a pair of expensive noise-canceling headphones rested around his neck. Victoria stowed her carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled into her seat with a small frown. As she arranged her personal items in the seat pocket, she glanced surreptitiously at the man's laptop screen complex spreadsheets and what looked like medical research data. The Garcia family made their way to row 4 directly behind Victoria. The children were quieter now, their excitement contained to wide eyes and whispered observations. "Look at the big seats," Sophia Danielle whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Shh," Elena reminded him gently. Inside voices on the plane. Victoria glanced back, her frown deepening as she watched the family settle in. As she turned forward again, she noticed more passengers entering the business class cabin. A black woman in a tailored business suit took her seat in 1D. An older black man with distinguished gray at his temples and horn-rimmed glasses settled into 2C, pulling out what looked like academic papers to review. Victoria's discomfort grew. She had not expected this. In her mind, business class had always been a sanctuary, a place where people like her people of means and status could travel in comfort away from the masses. But now looking around, she saw that at least a third of the business class cabin was filled with black passengers, like a bird of prey finding its territory invaded. Victoria felt her sense of ownership over the premium cabin space threatened. Her fingers tightened around the armrest knuckles, whitening slightly as she observed what she perceived as an encroachment. Her gaze drifted to a young Hispanic man in seat 2D who was discreetly adjusting his phone, seemingly setting it up to record something. Jordan Ramirez, according to the luggage tag visible on his sleek carry-on, had the casual confidence of a social media influencer, which in fact he was with over 2 million followers across platforms. Victoria pulled her cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders, a physical manifestation of her mental withdrawal. This was not right. This was not what she had paid for. $7,000. That is what her business class ticket had cost. $7,000 for priority boarding for a spacious seat that reclined into a bed for attentive service and for the right kind of company. The kind of company that did not include noisy children or people who did not look like they belonged in business class. Victoria knew somewhere in the recesses of her mind that these thoughts were not acceptable in today's world. She would never voice them publicly, she was not stupid. But in the privacy of her own mind, she felt entitled to her discomfort, justified in her sense that something was off about the arrangement of this cabin. As more passengers boarded and the business class section filled, Victoria's unease crystallized into irritation. She glanced at her watch again as though the time might somehow validate her growing sense of grievance. $7,000, and this is what she got. The overhead bins slammed shut one by one as passengers settled in. The low hum of the aircraft systems provided a backdrop to the rustle of magazines, the click of seatbelts, and the murmured conversations around her. Victoria sat rigid in her seat, jaw tight, waiting for the flight attendant to offer her the pre-departure beverage that might take the edge off this increasingly unpleasant situation. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, ma'am?" The flight attendant's voice pulled Victoria from her simmering thoughts. The woman who stood in the aisle was in her early 40s with warm brown eyes and the confident posture of someone who had been managing airborne situations for decades. Her name tag read Sophia Morales, lead flight attendant, and her perfectly applied makeup and immaculate uniform spoke of professional pride. Champagne Victoria replied without looking up, her tone making it clear this was an expectation rather than a request. "Of course," Sophia responded smoothly. "And would you like a hot towel as well?" Victoria gave a curt nod, then added, "And can you do something about that noise?" Sophia glanced around momentarily confused. The cabin was relatively quiet, the normal sounds of boarding but nothing excessive. "I am sorry. Which noise are you referring to? Victoria tilted her head toward the row behind her. Those children. This is business class, not a playground. Sophia looked past Victoria to where the Garcia children were quietly settling into their seats. Sophia was carefully arranging colored pencils in a small case while Daniel was reading a book about space. They were being exceptionally well behaved by any standard. The children seem to be quite quiet, ma'am, Sophia observed diplomatically. But I will be sure to monitor the noise level during the flight. Victoria's eyes narrowed. It is not just the noise, she said, lowering her voice slightly. It is the entire situation. Sophia's professional smile remained in place, but a slight wariness entered her eyes. What situation would that be, ma'am? Victoria leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper that was not actually quiet enough to be private. I am not comfortable. She glanced meaningfully toward the black man in 3B, then at the Garcia family behind her. It is those people. This cabin. It is just full of them. I did not pay $7,000 for a business class ticket to feel unsafe. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud poisoning the atmosphere. Sophia's expression froze, the professional smile still in place, but no longer reaching her eyes. Around them, the ambient noise of the cabin seemed to drop as passengers in nearby seats processed what they had just heard. Dr. Andre Powell in seat 3B slowly removed his noise-canceling headphones, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with awareness, behind Victoria Doctor. Elena Garcia's hand found her husband squeezing it in a silent signal. Michael Garcia unfastened his seatbelt and stood up, his tall frame imposing but his demeanor calm. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice measured and authoritative. Sophia turned to him, her professionalism holding despite the situation. No, sir. I was just explaining to this passenger that the noise level is within our normal parameters. I am not talking about parameters, Victoria said, her composure cracking slightly. This is ridiculous. It is an American flight, not a charity case. I want to be moved. I demand it. Ma'am, Sophia said, her voice firm now. The cabin is full, and I will not tolerate discriminatory language on my flight. Your flight. Victoria laughed, a short barking sound that drew even more attention. You are a glorified waitress. I want to speak to the person in charge. I want to speak to the pilot right now. Jordan Ramirez in seat 2D had his phone subtly positioned, now the red recording light visible to those paying attention. His face remained neutral, but his fingers worked quickly to ensure he was capturing everything. Dr. Powell had fully removed his headphones now and was watching the scene unfold with the calculated assessment of someone who had seen similar situations before. He did not speak, but his presence, intelligent, composed, and undeniably aware, added a layer of tension to the moment. Ma'am, the captain is preparing for departure. I can assure you, Sophia began. Get him out here, Victoria insisted, her voice rising. Now. That won't be necessary. The new voice was deep resonant and came from directly behind Sophia. The curtain separating the galley from the cabin had been pulled aside. Standing there was a tall, commanding figure in a pilot's uniform. Captain Dominic Reynolds was in his late 40s with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and the straight-backed posture of someone with military training. His uniform was impeccable, the 4 stripes on his sleeves gleaming under the cabin lights. His face was impassive, his dark eyes taking in the scene with practiced assessment. And he was unmistakably a black man. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. A flush crept up her neck, not embarrassment, but annoyance at being caught off guard. Captain Reynolds had come to check the final manifest with Sophia and had been standing in the galley unseen for the last 30 seconds. He had heard everything. His eyes did not immediately go to Victoria. First, he looked at the Garcia family. He gave them a slow, almost imperceptible nod of reassurance. He looked at Dr. Powell, who returned his gaze with silent understanding. He looked at Sophia, whose professional demeanor was holding, but who looked like she might be fighting back tears. Only then did Captain Reynolds turn his attention to Victoria Blackwell. He held her gaze for a long, silent 5 seconds. His expression was not angry. If anything, he looked profoundly tired, like a man who had seen this scene play out too many times before a bird of prey who had spotted this particular type of rodent countless times from his higher vantage point. He did not say a word to her. He simply turned to Sophia. "Sophia, please secure the galley for departure." Then, in a move that no one could have predicted, Captain Reynolds reached up and slowly, deliberately undid the top button of his uniform shirt. With the same measured precision, he removed his pilot's cap from his head and tucked it under his arm. Without another word, he turned and walked back through the curtain into the cockpit. The cabin was utterly silent now. Every passenger in business class was watching the scene unfold. A moment later, First Officer Nathan Klein, a man in his early 30s with thinning blonde hair and wire-rimmed glasses, hurried out from the cockpit, his face ashen. He looked at Victoria in pure horror. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Before anyone could respond, the plane's intercom crackled to life. It was not the captain's voice. It was First Officer Klein, who had apparently ducked back into the cockpit and picked up the handset. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking from the flight deck. Due to an unforeseen and non-mechanical crew issue, the captain has declared himself unfit to fly. He has disembarked the aircraft. This flight is indefinitely delayed. We will need everyone to deplane and return to the gate. I repeat, all passengers must deplane." The cabin erupted in confusion and anger. Captain Dominic Reynolds had not arrived at this moment by accident. 25 years in aviation, 4 in the Air Force, and 21 in commercial aviation had prepared him for many things: emergency landings, sudden weather changes, medical crises at 37,000 feet. But nothing in his training had given him a protocol for what to do when a passenger objected to the color of his skin or the heritage of his fellow passengers. As he stood in the galley listening to Victoria Blackwell's words, he felt the familiar weight of this particular burden. It was not rage that filled him, though rage would have been justified. It was a bone-deep weariness, the kind that comes from fighting the same battle too many times. When he emerged from behind the curtain, he did so with the measured control that had become his armor. At 48, Dominic Reynolds carried himself with the disciplined posture that West Point had instilled in him before his transfer to the Air Force Academy. His uniform was impeccable, a personal standard he had maintained since his days as a second lieutenant. The 4 stripes on his sleeves represented not just his rank as captain, but the thousands of hours he had spent mastering his craft, earning the right to command an aircraft carrying hundreds of lives. His face betrayed nothing as he surveyed the cabin. Years of experience had taught him that his reactions were always scrutinized more heavily than his white colleagues. A raised voice, a flash of anger, even justified indignation, these were luxuries he could not afford, not without risking labels that would follow him throughout his career. So instead he led with compassion. His first glance went to the Garcia family standing awkwardly in the aisle of row 4. He knew that look. The mortification, the anger held in check, the protective instinct toward their children who were witnessing bigotry, perhaps, for the first time in such naked form. His slight nod to them was not just acknowledgement. It was solidarity, a silent communication that said, "I see you, and this is not about you." His eyes moved to Dr. Andre Powell, whose composed expression masked what Reynolds recognized as the calculation every black professional learns to make: when to speak up, when to remain silent, when to let someone else fight the battle. Powell's subtle nod in return spoke volumes, a recognition between 2 men who understood the complex calculus of navigating white spaces while black. When he looked at Sophia Morales, Reynolds saw the strain in her professional composure. As a Hispanic woman in aviation, she had doubtless faced her own versions of this scenario. The slight tremor in her hands did not escape his notice, the adrenaline response to conflict, to being put in an impossible position by a passenger who viewed her as nothing more than a waitress. His glance to her conveyed respect for her handling of the situation and absolved her of the burden of resolving it. Only after acknowledging these allies did Captain Reynolds turn his attention to Victoria Blackwell. Looking at her, he saw beyond the designer clothes and haughty expression. He saw a woman so ensconced in privilege that she viewed diversity not as normal but as an intrusion. He saw someone who had never had to question her right to occupy any space she chose. As he held her gaze for those 5 long seconds, he was making calculations of his own. He was thinking of FAA Regulation 121.5533, which granted him ultimate authority over the aircraft. He was thinking of his responsibility to all passengers, not just the ones paying $7,000 for a business-class seat. He was thinking of the children watching this encounter and what lesson they would learn from how it was handled. He was also thinking of his wife Amara, who had kissed him goodbye that morning with the familiar words, "Fly safe, but stand your ground." Amara, who had supported him through incidents like this before, who understood the toll they took, but never suggested he compromise his principles for an easier path. His decision, when it came, was not impulsive. It was calculated, considered, and compliant with all regulatory frameworks. As a pilot, Dominic Reynolds was responsible for the safety of everyone on that aircraft. And in that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that his judgment was compromised not by anger, but by the bone-deep exhaustion of confronting the same bigotry he had been navigating his entire life. As they taught at the academy, you cannot safely fly above the clouds if your mind is still mired in the fog below. He had a responsibility not just to Victoria Blackwell, not just to the other passengers, but to the entire operation to recognize when his focus was compromised. When he unbuttoned his collar and removed his cap, the universal signal that a pilot is off duty, it was not theater. It was an honest acknowledgement that he could not in good conscience command this flight with the focus and clarity required. Captain Reynolds was not just walking away. He was exercising the highest level of professional judgment by recognizing when he was no longer fit to fly. The simple act of removing his cap transformed the moment. Captain Reynolds's movements were precise and deliberate, like everything he did in the cockpit. His fingers moved to the top button of his uniform with the same measured confidence they showed when adjusting critical flight controls. The sound of the button releasing from its hole seemed unnaturally loud in the silent cabin. The slight movement of fabric as his collar loosened carried an unexpected weight of finality. The careful way he tucked his cap under his arm, not carelessly, never carelessly, spoke of respect for the uniform, even in this moment of stepping away from it. These were not dramatic gestures. They were not meant for show or impact. They were the quiet, procedural movements of a man who had spent decades adhering to protocols. But in their very ordinariness, they became extraordinary, a peaceful but unmistakable act of resistance. Without a word to Victoria, without a sound of protest or a moment of confrontation, Captain Reynolds turned and walked back through the curtain. His footsteps were steady, his back straight. He did not slam the curtain shut behind him. That would have been a display of emotion he would not allow himself. Instead, the fabric settled back into place with a soft whisper that somehow seemed more definitive than any thunderous exit could have been. The cabin fell into a strange silence, not the usual pre-departure hush of passengers settling in, but the loaded silence that follows an unexpected turning point, a moment when everyone present realizes they are witnessing something significant. First Officer Nathan Klein emerged from the cockpit moments later, his face drained of color. At 32, Klein was relatively new to long-haul international routes. He had been Captain Reynolds' first officer for just 3 months, but in that time had developed tremendous respect for the senior pilot's skill and judgment. Never had he imagined being thrust into a situation like this. Klein's eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the tableau, Victoria Blackwell still seated rigidly in 3A. Dr. Powell watching intently from 3B, the Garcia family standing in row 4, Sophia Morales frozen in the aisle, and at least a dozen other passengers all staring in stunned silence. "What did you do?" Klein whispered, the words escaping before he could think better of them. His gaze was fixed on Victoria, a mixture of horror and disbelief contorting his youthful features. Without waiting for a response, Klein ducked back into the cockpit. Seconds later, his voice came over the intercom, the slight tremor betraying his shock and the enormity of what was unfolding. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking from the flight deck. Due to an unforeseen and non-mechanical crew issue, the captain has declared himself unfit to fly. He has disembarked the aircraft. This flight is indefinitely delayed. We will need everyone to deplane and return to the gate. I repeat, all passengers must deplane." The words fell like stones into a still pond, sending ripples of confusion through the cabin. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then the questions began overlapping and escalating in volume. "What does that mean? Unfit to fly? Did he just quit? What is happening?" Victoria Blackwell sat bolt upright, her face a mask of indignation. What? He abandoned his post. This is unprofessional. I have a wedding to get to Jordan." Ramirez's phone was still recording, capturing Victoria's reaction in high definition. His expression remained neutral, but there was a certain intensity in his focus now, the instinct of someone who knew they were documenting something significant. As the Garcia family gathered their belongings, Michael paused by Victoria's seat. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The cabin had fallen into a hushed state where every word carried. "I hope you are proud, lady," he said, his voice level but his eyes hard. "You complained there were too many of us on board." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Well, now there is one less. The most important one." Victoria was speechless. The blood drained from her face as understanding dawned. The captain she had demanded to see, the captain who had just walked off the plane, was one of them, the very people whose presence she had objected to. Throughout the cabin, passengers were processing what had happened. Some were checking their phones, already searching for alternative flights. Others were whispering to each other, recounting what they had witnessed. A few were openly glaring at Victoria, making no attempt to hide their disgust. Sophia Morales activated the intercom from her station in the galley. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for this disruption. Please gather your personal belongings and proceed to the gate in an orderly fashion. Gate agents will assist you with rebooking options." As the reality of the situation sank in, a new sound began to fill the cabin, the soft metallic clicks of seatbelts being unbuckled, followed by the rustling of passengers collecting their belongings. The dream of London was evaporating, replaced by the harsh fluorescent reality of JFK at night, and all eyes were on the woman in seat 3A who had caused it. "This is outrageous," Victoria sputtered, still rooted to her seat, as passengers around her began to gather their belongings. "He cannot just walk off. There are rules, procedures." No one responded to her. The black woman in seat 1D deliberately avoided eye contact as she collected her laptop. The older black man in 2C shook his head slightly as he reached for his bag in the overhead compartment. Dr. Powell in 3B stood with measured calm, his movements unhurried but purposeful as he packed away his laptop. "He should be fired for this." Victoria continued, her voice rising. "I will be speaking to Delta Corporate about this completely unprofessional behavior." Jordan Ramirez was still recording his phone, now held more openly as the situation had fully escalated. He caught Victoria's eye and did not look away, the small red light on his device a clear indication that her words were being preserved. "Are you filming me?" Victoria demanded, her hand flying up as if to shield herself. "That is an invasion of privacy. Stop that immediately." "We are in a public space, ma'am," Jordan replied calmly. and this is a matter of public interest. Victoria finally unbuckled her seatbelt and stood gathering her belongings with jerky, agitated movements. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled her Hermes scarf tighter around her neck, a reflexive gesture of self-protection. As passengers filed toward the exit, the atmosphere was charged with a strange, tense energy. The usual frustrated sighs and muttered complaints that accompany flight delays were absent. Instead, there was a focused, collective awareness, the sense that something significant had just occurred, something that transcended the inconvenience of altered travel plans. Victoria found herself isolated in a bubble of negative space as she moved down the aisle. Passengers who would normally press forward in the typical rush to deplane drew back slightly as she passed. No one wanted to brush against her as though her bigotry might be contagious. When she reached the jet bridge, Victoria's step faltered. Through the windows, she could see activity at the Gate Airline staff huddled in conversation, passengers gathering in clusters, and multiple phone cameras pointed in her direction. Word had spread rapidly, traveling faster than she could physically move from plane to gate. Jordan Ramirez was already tapping at his phone, uploading the video with a swift caption, "Racist passenger gets entire flight cancelled at JFK, had flight drama, #Captain stands." The upload bar filled rapidly, his premium data plan ensuring the video would be circulating before Victoria even reached the terminal. "Excuse me," a firm voice said from behind. Victoria turned to find Dr. Elena Garcia, her expression coolly professional, but her eyes hard. "You need to keep moving. You are blocking the exit." Victoria stepped forward, automatically unused to being instructed by others, but momentarily thrown off balance by the situation. As she entered the gate area, the buzz of conversation dropped momentarily, then resumed at a higher volume. She caught fragments of discussion. "That is her. The one who complained about. Can you believe she said Captain just walked off?" A young woman with purple-tipped hair pointed openly at Victoria while whispering to her companion. An elderly gentleman in a tweed jacket gave her a look of such profound disappointment that Victoria felt a rare flash of something approaching shame, which she quickly suppressed in favor of indignation. She straightened her shoulders and marched toward the gate desk, determined to regain control of the narrative. "I need to speak to a manager immediately," she announced to the gate agent, a young man whose name tag read Carlos. "This situation is completely unacceptable. Ma'am, if you could please wait a moment." Carlos replied, his customer service smile strained. "Our gate manager is on her way to address the situation." "I do not have moments to wait," Victoria insisted. "I have a connection to make. I need to be in London by tomorrow evening." From behind her came an unmistakably sarcastic laugh. Victoria turned to see a middle-aged woman shaking her head. "Lady, none of us are going to London tonight because of you." A murmur of agreement rippled through the nearby passengers. Victoria felt heat rising in her cheeks, an unfamiliar sensation of being judged and found wanting by strangers, people she would normally consider beneath her notice. "You do not understand," Victoria said, her voice slightly higher than normal. "I have my daughter's wedding. It is critical that We all have places to be interrupted, a businessman in a rumpled suit. I am missing a meeting that took months to arrange. But I would rather be late than fly with a pilot who has been insulted by a passenger." Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but was cut short by the arrival of gate manager Luisa Hernandez, a composed woman in her 50s whose Delta uniform and authoritative presence immediately commanded attention. Ms. Blackwell Luisa asked, her tone professionally neutral, but her eyes assessing. "I am Luisa Hernandez, gate manager for Delta. I understand there was an incident on board that led to the cancellation of Flight 237. "There certainly was," Victoria replied, seizing the opportunity to present her version of events. "Your captain abandoned his post without explanation. It was completely unprofessional and has disrupted the travel plans of everyone here. I expect Delta to remedy this situation immediately." Louisa's expression did not change, but something in her eyes hardened slightly. Ms. Blackwell, I have received a preliminary report from our flight crew. According to multiple witnesses, you made discriminatory comments about several passengers, and the captain himself creating a hostile environment that compromised flight safety. Victoria felt the ground shifting beneath her. This was not proceeding as she had expected. That is not I merely expressed concerns about my comfort and safety. I paid $7,000 for my ticket. I have certain expectations. Ma'am Louisa said, her voice now carrying a definitive edge. Let me be very clear. Under FAA regulations, the captain has absolute authority over the aircraft. If Captain Reynolds determined he was unfit to fly for any reason, that decision is final and within his rights as commander of the aircraft. Victoria felt a growing sense of disorientation, like a bird suddenly finding itself caught in a downdraft. This was not how these situations resolved in her experience. She was Victoria Blackwell. She made complaints. Others apologized. She expressed dissatisfaction. Others scrambled to appease her. The script had been flipped, and she was struggling to find her footing in this new reality where her privilege was not the determining factor. Now, regarding your onward travel, Louisa continued, consulting her tablet. I'm afraid all direct flights to London this evening are fully booked. Additionally, she paused, the slight hesitation pregnant with meaning. I need to inform you that pending review of this incident, you are being placed on Delta's no-fly list. You will not be permitted to board any Delta flights until this matter is resolved. The words fell like a physical blow. Victoria actually took a step backward. No-fly list. You cannot be serious. Do you have any idea who I am? The question hung in the air, suddenly seeming hollow and pathetic even to Victoria's own ears. Around her, passengers watched the exchange with undisguised interest, many with phones raised, capturing her downfall in real time. Ms. Blackwell, Louisa replied evenly. At this moment, you are a passenger who has violated our non-discrimination policy and contributed to the cancellation of an international flight affecting over 300 people. That is the only relevant identity in this situation. Victoria's world, so carefully constructed and maintained, was beginning to crack around the edges. This is absurd, Victoria insisted, her voice pitched higher than usual. I want to file a formal complaint against Captain Reynolds for abandoning his responsibilities. I want to speak to whoever is in charge of pilot conduct. Luisa Hernandez maintained her professional demeanor, but there was a steely glint in her eye that had not been there moments before. Ms. Blackwell, you are certainly entitled to file a complaint. However, I should inform you that multiple passengers have already filed complaints against you, citing discriminatory behavior that created a hostile environment. She gestured discreetly toward the growing cluster of passengers near the gate desk. Dr. Andre Powell stood speaking quietly with a Delta representative, his expression serious as he recounted the events on the aircraft. The Garcia family was similarly engaged with another staff member. Jordan Ramirez was showing something on his phone to a third Delta employee, undoubtedly the video he had recorded. If you would like to speak with someone regarding pilot conduct, I can connect you with our passenger advocacy coordinator. Louisa offered her tone, making it clear this was a formal process rather than the customer service capitulation Victoria was accustomed to receiving. Yes, I would, Victoria replied, struggling to maintain her composure. One moment, please. While Louisa made a call, Victoria became increasingly aware of the activity around her. Gate agents were busily rebooking passengers, printers churning out new boarding passes as arrangements were made. Announcements echoed through the terminal about the canceled flight and alternative options. And through it all, she felt the weight of glances, the unmistakable sensation of being observed, judged, and found wanting. A few minutes later, a tall black man in a tailored suit approached. His Delta ID badge identified him as Terrell Jackson, Passenger Advocacy Coordinator. Ms. Blackwell, he greeted her with professional courtesy, but notably without warmth. I understand you wish to file a complaint about Captain Reynolds' decision to remove himself from duty. That is right, Victoria said, straightening her spine and gathering the remnants of her dignity. His behavior was completely unprofessional. He abandoned his post because of a simple comment about passenger comfort. Hundreds of people are inconvenienced because he was too sensitive to handle criticism. Tyrell's expression remained neutral, but he took a moment before responding, a deliberate pause that made Victoria uncomfortably aware of how her words might sound to others. Ms. Blackwell, I would like to explain a few things about aviation regulations, if I may. He began, his tone measured and educational rather than confrontational. Under FAA Regulation 121.533, the pilot in command, in this case Captain Reynolds, has full and final authority over the operation of the aircraft. This includes the responsibility to ensure they are fit to fly. He opened a tablet and pulled up an official-looking document. The regulation specifically states that the pilot in command shall discontinue the flight when, in the pilot in command's judgment, the flight cannot safely be completed. This determination is entirely at the captain's discretion. Victoria blinked momentarily, thrown by the shift from customer service platitudes to regulatory specifics. But there was nothing unsafe about the flight. The weather is clear, the plane was fine. Safety encompasses more than mechanical or weather conditions, Tyrell explained patiently. It includes the psychological state of the crew. If a pilot determines that their judgment or concentration has been compromised for any reason, they are not only permitted but required to remove themselves from duty. He continued, his voice taking on a more pointed edge while maintaining professional courtesy. In fact, if Captain Reynolds had proceeded with the flight while believing his judgment was impaired, regardless of the reason for that impairment, he would have been in violation of federal regulations and potentially subject to license revocation. Victoria's certainty faltered. This was not proceeding according to the script she was accustomed to, where her complaints were met with apologies and accommodations. Now, regarding your travel plans, Tyrell continued, consulting his tablet. As Ms. Hernandez mentioned, you have been temporarily placed on Delta's no-fly list pending a full review of today's incident. This is standard procedure when there is an allegation of discriminatory behavior that disrupts flight operations. And how long does this review take? Victoria asked, the reality of her situation beginning to sink in. Typically, 7 to 10 business days, Tyrell replied. During that time, our customer relations team will gather statements from crew members and passengers, review any available documentation or recordings, and make a determination about whether your actions violated our contract of carriage. Victoria's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down to see a text from her husband. What is happening? There is a video going viral of you on a Delta flight. People are tagging our company accounts. Call me immediately. The ground seemed to shift beneath her designer heels. This was not just a travel inconvenience anymore. This was bleeding into her real life, her carefully constructed world of privilege and social standing. As for alternative travel arrangements, Tyrell continued, seemingly oblivious to her internal panic. While you cannot fly Delta, at this time we can provide contact information for other carriers. However, I should note that most flights to London this evening are fully booked due to the summer travel season. The earliest available options would likely depart tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow afternoon? Victoria's mind raced with the implications. She would miss the rehearsal dinner entirely. She had promised Lady Diana Harrington Wells that she would be there to help finalize the seating arrangements, a task of critical diplomatic importance given the complex social hierarchies at play. This is unacceptable, she said, but the words lacked their earlier conviction. I need to be in London by tomorrow evening. I understand your frustration, Tyrell said, his tone suggesting he understood far more than just her travel inconvenience. Unfortunately, these are the options available under the circumstances. Victoria's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from her daughter, Mom. What have you done? James's mother just called. She saw a video of you making racist comments on a plane. Please tell me this is not real. Reality was collapsing around Victoria Blackwell. The carefully constructed facade of her life, the social standing, the respect commanded by her wealth and position was crumbling in real time, and she was powerless to stop it. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, her money and status were not enough to shield her from the consequences of her actions. As she stood in the harsh fluorescent lighting of Gate 42B, surrounded by the consequences of her bigotry, Victoria Blackwell had never felt more exposed. By the time Victoria Blackwell finally secured a business-class seat on a British Airways flight, departing the following afternoon at nearly double the cost of her original Delta ticket, Jordan Ramirez's video had accumulated over 2.1 million views across platforms. The hashtags #CaptainReynolds, Stand, and #BusinessClassBigot were trending nationally, with the video being reshared by celebrities, social justice advocates, and ordinary people alike. Jordan, whose travel and lifestyle content usually garnered modest engagement, found himself at the center of a viral moment. His follower count had jumped by 300,000 in just 4 hours. As a content creator who had built his brand on authentic travel experiences, he recognized both the responsibility and opportunity presented by capturing this moment. "I was not trying to create a viral video," he explained during a hastily arranged interview with a popular morning news program that was being conducted via video call from his hotel room near JFK. "I just knew I was witnessing something important." When she started making those comments, I felt I had a responsibility to document it. The media landscape seized upon the story with predictable fervor. Cable news chyrons blared, "Business class bigot passengers racist comments," "Force flight cancellation." Online publications rushed to publish think pieces with titles like "The Entitlement Epidemic, When Privilege Meets Accountability," and "The Power of Walking Away, Captain's Quiet Protest Speaks Volumes." But it was not just traditional media that was amplifying the story. On Twitter, a user had quickly identified Victoria. The woman in the video is Victoria Blackwell, co-owner of Blackwell Properties, a major NYC real estate firm. Their website is already getting flooded with comments. Indeed, the Blackwell Properties website had crashed under the sudden traffic surge as thousands of people flocked to their contact page to express outrage. The company's social media accounts were being inundated with comments, many tagging major clients and business partners, asking if they condoned such behavior from their leadership. Screenshots from Victoria's personal Instagram account, featuring her at charity galas, exclusive social events, and luxurious vacations, were being circulated and dissected. Her carefully curated online presence, once a testament to her wealth and social standing, was now providing ammunition for critics who pointed to it as evidence of her disconnection from reality and sense of entitlement. "This is what happens when people live in bubbles of privilege," wrote one Twitter user in a post that had been retweeted over 50,000 times. "They forget how to interact with people who do not look like them." In the comment sections beneath the viral video, thousands shared their own experiences with discrimination while traveling, creating an impromptu repository of similar stories that highlighted how Victoria's behavior, while extreme, was not isolated. Black and brown professionals recounted being questioned about their first-class seats being mistaken for service staff or being subjected to extra scrutiny at security checkpoints. Dr. Andre Powell, the tech entrepreneur from Seat 3B, had been identified by colleagues who recognized him in the video. As the founder of MedTech Innovations, a healthcare technology company valued at over $200 million, Powell was well known in business circles. His company issued a brief statement on his behalf, and a doctor. Powell appreciates the outpouring of support following yesterday's unfortunate incident. He commends Captain Reynolds for his professionalism and principled stance. This experience, while personally disappointing, reinforces why Dr. Powell's company remains committed to creating more equitable spaces in both healthcare and the broader business community. The Garcia family had declined media requests, prioritizing their children's well-being over public attention. but their presence in the video, particularly the moment when Michael Garcia calmly confronted Victoria, had resonated deeply with viewers. Comments praised his restraint and dignity in the face of blatant prejudice. For Sofia Morales, the lead flight attendant, the incident had triggered an outpouring of support from fellow flight attendants who shared the #StandWithSofia, highlighting the often invisible emotional labor required of service professionals who must maintain composure in the face of discriminatory behavior. In a particularly damaging development for Victoria, several former employees of Blackwell Properties began sharing their own experiences of discrimination within the company. An Instagram account named @BlackwellTruth sprang up overnight, collecting and publishing anonymous testimonials from past staff members, alleging that Victoria had fostered a toxic work environment where racial microaggressions were commonplace and promotions for people of color were rare. Delta Airlines issued a carefully worded statement that managed to address the incident without directly naming. Victoria Delta has a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior of any kind. We support our crew members' authority to ensure a safe and respectful environment for all passengers. We are investigating yesterday's incident and will take appropriate action. We apologize to the passengers whose travel was disrupted and are working to accommodate them on alternate flights. As Victoria sat alone in the sterile comfort of an airport hotel room, desperately trying to reach her increasingly distant husband by phone, the story continued to unfold without her input or control. Her name was being discussed on national television. Her face was appearing in news segments. Her words were being dissected and condemned by strangers around the world. The private bubble she had inhabited for so long, where wealth insulated her from consequences and status, granted her immunity from criticism, had been irreparably punctured. And the air was rushing out at an alarming rate. At home in his modest colonial in Westchester County, Captain Dominic Reynolds sat in his study, the evening news muted on the television in the corner. The screen showed footage of JFK Airport with a headline about the incident, but he had turned off the sound half an hour ago. He did not need to hear the commentary. He had lived it. His wife Amara entered with 2 mugs of tea, setting one beside him before taking a seat in the adjacent armchair. At 45, Amara Reynolds carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had built a successful career as an education policy consultant while supporting her husband through the unique challenges of being a black pilot in a predominantly white industry. "You have been quiet?" she observed, her voice gentle but direct. "Talk to me, Dom." Dominic sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "I keep wondering if I made the right call." "You know you did," Amara replied without hesitation. "Do I?" He turned to face her fully. 300 passengers had their plans disrupted. Some of them missed connections, important meetings, family events. And whose fault is that? Amara asked, her tone sharpening slightly. "Not yours. You did not create that situation." Dominic nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words, even as he wrestled with the weight of his decision. His phone buzzed with another text message, the 16th in the past hour. This one was from Captain Malik Johnson, a fellow black pilot and longtime mentor. "Just saw the news. You did exactly what I would have done. Call me when you can." The support was overwhelming and unexpected. In the hours since the incident, Dominic had received messages from colleagues across multiple airlines, from his former Air Force squadron mates, and from the small but tight-knit community of black commercial airline pilots. The Airline Pilots Association had already contacted him, assuring him of their full support and legal backing if needed. "The airline called," he said to Amara. "Senior VP of Flight Operations said they are standing behind my decision 100%. Amara raised an eyebrow. "They had better. You followed protocol to the letter. Publicly, they have to be more measured," Dominic continued. "Corporate PR is walking that tightrope, condemning discrimination while not alienating passengers who might sympathize with her viewpoint." "There is always a tightrope," Amara murmured, a trace of bitterness in her voice. She had seen firsthand how her husband navigated spaces where the rules were different for him than for his white colleagues. How a raised voice, a moment of frustration, or even a direct confrontation of racism could be career-ending for a black pilot in ways it never would be for others. Dominic's phone rang his daughter Zoe, calling from Howard University, where she was studying aerospace engineering. You are trending," she exclaimed as soon as he answered, her voice a mixture of pride and concern. "So I have heard," he replied, a small smile finally breaking through. "How are you holding up? Are you getting any unwanted attention from this?" "Do not worry about me," Zoe said firmly. "My friends are all saying you are a hero. One of my professors used you as an example in class today about ethical leadership and standing your ground." After reassuring Zoe that he was fine and promising to visit soon, Dominic ended the call and turned back to Amara. "She sounds proud of you," Amara observed. "As she should be." "I did not do it to be a hero or to make a statement," Dominic said quietly. "I did it because I could not safely operate that aircraft. Not after that. Not with the anger I was feeling." "That is exactly why it was the right decision," Amara pointed out. "You put safety first, just like you were trained to do. The fact that it also happens to be a powerful statement about human dignity is a bonus." Dominic nodded, some of the tension finally leaving his shoulders. In his 25 years of flying from F-16s for the Air Force to commercial aircraft, he had faced countless challenging situations. He had made emergency landings in bad weather, navigated equipment malfunctions at 37,000 feet, and guided nervous first officers through turbulence. But none of those situations had tested his professional judgment like today's incident. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from First Officer Nathan Klein. "Just wanted to check in, sir. The crew is behind you 100%. What you did today is something I will remember for my entire career." This, perhaps more than anything, validated his decision. Nathan was young, still finding his footing as a pilot. The example Dominic set today, prioritizing both safety and dignity, would shape how Nathan approached similar situations in the future. "I am not sure what happens next," Dominic admitted to Amara. "The airline says they want me back in the rotation as soon as I feel ready. There is talk of promoting me to the Standards and Training Division. Whatever comes next," Amara said, reaching for his hand, "you will face it the same way you have faced everything else, with integrity. That woman on the plane, she thought she had all the power because of her money and her privilege. But today you showed her and everyone else what real power looks like. The power to say no. The power to walk away. The power to demand respect, not just for yourself, but for every passenger on that plane." Dominic squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her unwavering support, as he had countless times before. Outside their window, reporters had already discovered his address and were setting up cameras on the sidewalk. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new scrutiny. But for tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of his home, Captain Dominic Reynolds was at peace with his decision. "They are already talking about making this a case study for crew training," he said softly, "using it to teach new pilots about when and how to exercise their authority in non-mechanical situations. Your moment of standing up by walking away might change how airlines handle these situations for years to come," Amara replied with a gentle smile. "Sometimes the most powerful legacy is not what you build, but what you refuse to accept." Victoria Blackwell's hotel room at the JFK Airport Marriott had become a war room of desperate damage control. Her Louis Vuitton luggage stood untouched by the door while she paced the carpeted floor. Her Manolo Blahniks discarded her perfect chignon, coming undone strand by strand. "I need to speak with Thomas immediately," she insisted to her husband's executive assistant, who had been running interference for the past 2 hours. "This is a family emergency. I am sorry, Mrs. Blackwell, but Mr. Blackwell is in an emergency board meeting and cannot be disturbed," the assistant replied, her voice professionally neutral but notably cooler than usual. "He asked me to inform you that he will call when he is available." Victoria ended the call with a frustrated tap and immediately dialed her travel agent, a woman who had arranged Victoria's luxury travel for over a decade and who had never failed to secure impossible reservations or last-minute accommodations. "Margot, I need options. Any options to get to London by tomorrow evening," Victoria said, dispensing with pleasantries. Money is no object. Margot's usually warm voice was noticeably reserved. "I have been searching since we last spoke, Victoria. There are simply no commercial flights available that would get you there in time. I have checked every airline, every possible connection." "What about private?" Victoria pressed. "Charter a jet if necessary." "I did inquire," Margot replied carefully. "The quotes are substantial. We are looking at approximately $85,000 for a last-minute transatlantic private charter, and even then there is limited availability due to a major financial conference in London this week." Victoria blanched at the figure but did not blink at the cost. "Book it. Whatever it takes." I should mention Margot added her tone, becoming even more careful, that some of the charter companies have seen the video. 2 have already declined to work with you specifically. Victoria felt as though she had been slapped. "Excuse me, they are refusing my business. Do they have any idea who I am?" "That is precisely the issue," Victoria Margot said quietly. "They do know who you are now. Everyone does." After ending the call with a promise from Margot to continue searching for options, Victoria finally forced herself to open social media. Her Instagram notifications had exploded, thousands of new comments on her most recent posts, most of them hostile. Her company's Facebook page was being flooded with 1-star reviews. Her daughter Eliza had set all her accounts to private. A text came through from a number Victoria did not recognize. "Is it true the business-class bigot is Victoria Blackwell from Blackwell Properties, asking for the internet?" She deleted it immediately, hands shaking. How had someone gotten her personal number? She changed her settings to only accept messages from contacts, but the damage was already spreading beyond digital spaces. Her phone rang a client she had been cultivating for months, a tech billionaire looking to invest in Manhattan real estate. "Victoria," he began without greeting, "I am calling to let you know we will be going in a different direction with our property search. Given the current situation, I do not think our partnership would be beneficial to either party." "Jonathan, whatever you have heard," Victoria started. "I have seen the video, Victoria," he cut in. "Everyone has. I cannot associate my brand with this kind of publicity. I am sure you understand. It is just business. Just business." The irony was not lost on Victoria. How many times had she used that exact phrase when dropping a property or a client that no longer served her interests? How many times had she discarded people who were no longer useful to her social climbing in a desperate bid to salvage something from the wreckage Victoria called her crisis management firm, Archer Communications, which handled PR for Blackwell Properties? The call went straight to voicemail. Minutes later, an email arrived from Samantha Archer herself. "Victoria, after careful consideration, Archer Communications has made the difficult decision to terminate our professional relationship with Blackwell Properties effective immediately. The values demonstrated in the widely circulated video are fundamentally incompatible with our agency's core principles. As you will understand, this decision is final and non-negotiable. Samantha Archer, CEO, Archer Communications." Victoria stared at the screen in disbelief. Being dropped by a PR firm, the very people paid to manage public relations disasters, was an unprecedented blow. It suggested that her situation was beyond the pale of normal damage control, that she had crossed a line that even professional spin doctors would not touch. With mounting desperation, Victoria attempted to reach out to several of her closest social allies, women who had sat on charity boards with her, who had attended her exclusive dinner parties, who had been photographed alongside her at Metropolitan Museum galas. Each call went unanswered. Each text received at best a terse, "cannot talk now" response. As the afternoon wore on, the calls and texts continued, some from genuine friends expressing concern, but most from business associates and social connections creating distance. The president of the Metropolitan Museum Gala Committee, where Victoria had secured a coveted table near the celebrities for the past 3 years, left a carefully worded voicemail about reassessing table arrangements. The chair of the Central Park Conservancy, where Victoria was a major donor, sent an email suggesting she might want to keep a low profile at the upcoming fundraiser. Even the doorman at her Upper East Side building had called to inform her that reporters were gathered in the lobby asking questions about her and taking photos of the entrance. Her phone rang again, this time the number of her daughter's future mother-in-law, Lady Diana Harrington Wells. Victoria stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the accept button. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Diana." She began adopting her most gracious tone. "I was just about to call you. There has been an unfortunate incident. Indeed, there has came the crisp British accent, the aristocratic tones cutting like ice. I have just spent the last hour watching a video of my future daughter-in-law's mother making abhorrent racist comments on an aircraft. I have also spent the last 30 minutes comforting Eliza, who is utterly mortified. Diana, it is being blown completely out of proportion." "I rather think not." Lady Diana interrupted. "I have heard the words from your own lips, Victoria. Quite illuminating, if not particularly surprising." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, my dear, that one's true character has a way of revealing itself eventually. I have had my suspicions about you since we first met, but I had hoped for Eliza's sake that I was mistaken." The call ended shortly thereafter, with Lady Diana making it very clear that while the wedding would proceed as planned, Victoria's role in it and her welcome in the Harrington Wells family circle would be significantly diminished. Alone in her hotel room, surrounded by the trappings of her wealth but stripped of the social standing that gave that wealth its meaning, Victoria Blackwell began to understand that some damage could not be repaired with money or connections. Some bridges once burned left only ashes, where once there had been pathways to privilege. Victoria's British Airways flight landed at Heathrow 22 hours later than her originally scheduled arrival. The journey had been an exercise in humiliation. Despite paying for business class, she had spent the 7-hour flight in a state of hypervigilance, acutely aware of the glances from fellow passengers who seemed to recognize her from the now viral video. The flight attendants had been professionally courteous but notably cool, their smiles never reaching their eyes when they addressed her. As she emerged from customs, Victoria was met not by the Harrington Wells family driver as originally planned, but by a young man in a suit holding a tablet with Blackwell displayed on the screen. "Mrs. Blackwell, I am from Exquisite Executive Transport. Lady Diana arranged for me to take you to your hotel." "Hotel?" Victoria's brow furrowed in confusion. "There must be some mistake. I am staying at Harrington House for the wedding." The young man checked his tablet, looking uncomfortable. "I am afraid my instructions are to take you to the Dorchester. Your luggage has already been redirected there." Victoria's cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "There has been a misunderstanding. Call Lady Diana immediately." "Ma'am, I am just the driver," he replied apologetically. "Perhaps you could sort this out directly with the family." The drive into central London was silent and tense. Victoria stared out the window at the passing scenery without seeing it, her mind racing with increasingly desperate scenarios. By the time she arrived at the Dorchester, admittedly one of London's finest hotels, but not the ancestral family estate where the wedding party was gathered, Victoria was oscillating between rage and panic. The front desk had indeed been expecting her with a suite reserved under her name billed to her own credit card. She noted bitterly not the Harrington Wells account as originally arranged. On the desk in her suite was an envelope bearing the Harrington Wells family crest. Inside was a note on heavy cream stationery written in Lady Diana's elegant hand. Victoria. In light of recent events, we feel it would be best for all concerned if you maintained a certain distance from the main wedding party. Eliza is understandably distressed and requires time to process her feelings about your behavior. James and I believe this arrangement will provide the necessary space while still allowing you to attend the ceremony itself. You will find an updated itinerary enclosed. Please note that your participation in pre-wedding activities has been adjusted. Diana Harrington Wells. The adjusted itinerary made Victoria's diminished status painfully clear. She had been disinvited from the rehearsal dinner that evening. Her place at the mother of the bride tea the following morning had been eliminated. The seating chart for the wedding ceremony had been revised, moving her from the front row to the third row, separated from the immediate family. Victoria sank onto the suite's elegant sofa, the letter clutched in her trembling hand. This was meant to be her triumph, her crowning achievement as a social strategist. For 25 years, she had carefully guided Eliza's path. The right schools, the right activities, the right friends, all culminating in this perfect marriage into British aristocracy. Now, instead of being celebrated as the architect of this social coup, she was being hidden away like an embarrassing family secret. Her phone rang Eliza's ringtone. Victoria lunged for it, desperate to hear her daughter's voice to explain to make things right. "Eliza, darling, there has been a terrible misunderstanding. Stop." Eliza's voice was cold in a way Victoria had never heard before. "Just stop, Mother. I have seen the video. Everyone has seen it. Do you have any idea what you have done? Sweetheart, it is being blown completely out of proportion. That captain overreacted." "No, he did not." Eliza cut in sharply. "If anything, he showed remarkable restraint. I could not believe what I was hearing. That was my mother talking about those people as if they were somehow less deserving of basic respect." "Eliza, please. Do you know what is happening right now? James's extended family is arriving from all over the world. His cousins from Barbados, his uncle from Nigeria, his grandmother's family from India. The Harrington Wells family has been multiracial for 3 generations, Mother. Did you ever bother to learn anything about them beyond their title and their money?" Victoria was speechless. She had seen photos of Lady Diana, of course a striking black British aristocrat whose family connections dated back centuries. But in her laser focus on the social advancement the marriage would bring, she had somehow overlooked or deliberately ignored the full picture of the family Eliza was joining. "The rehearsal dinner is in 2 hours," Eliza continued, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Lady Diana thinks you should not be there, and I agree. Maybe by tomorrow I will be ready to see you. But right now I can barely stand to hear your voice." The call ended, leaving Victoria alone in the luxurious suite surrounded by all the trappings of wealth, but stripped of the one thing her money could not buy: her daughter's respect. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria Blackwell felt truly powerless. As she stood staring at her reflection in the hotel room mirror, Victoria was confronted with an uncomfortable truth. The woman who had so carefully crafted her daughter's life path had just become the greatest obstacle to her daughter's happiness. And no amount of money, social connections, or privilege could undo the damage she had caused. Victoria Blackwell's return to New York was marked by an eerie silence. The wedding, which had proceeded with Victoria relegated to a back row seat and excluded from family photos at Eliza's request, was now 3 days behind her. The coldness of her reception in London had been matched only by the frostiness of her journey home, where she had flown commercial despite her no-fly status, with Delta having miraculously resolved after the negative publicity for the airline became too great to bear. Her driver Ahmed, who had served the Blackwell family for over a decade, was uncharacteristically quiet as they drove from JFK to her Upper East Side penthouse. Victoria, still jet-lagged and emotionally drained, did not notice his reticence until they were halfway into Manhattan. "Ahmed, is everything all right? You are very quiet today." He met her eyes briefly in the rearview mirror before returning his gaze to the road. Everything is fine, Mrs. Blackwell. Just focusing on traffic. But everything was not fine, as Victoria discovered when she finally reached her penthouse. Thomas was not home, his closet half empty, his personal items missing from the bathroom. On the kitchen island was a note in his precise handwriting, staying at the Beekman for now. We need to talk, but not today. We'll call tomorrow. Victoria sank onto one of the Italian leather bar stools, the note trembling in her hand. In 27 years of marriage, Thomas had never spent a single night away from home except for business travel. The emptiness of the penthouse seemed to echo with unspoken accusations. Her phone, which she had mostly ignored during the flight, was overflowing with notifications. Over 200 emails, dozens of missed calls, and a flood of text messages demanded her attention. With growing dread, Victoria began to sort through them, starting with her assistant's increasingly urgent messages. Victoria, the board is requesting an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Landmark Investments is threatening to pull out of the Hudson Yards project. They are citing reputational concerns. The Times is asking for a comment regarding your viral video. What should I tell them, Victoria? Please call me back. This is getting worse by the hour. She switched to her email, scanning subject lines with mounting horror. Urgent. Client withdrawal of services. Termination of partnership agreement. Request for your immediate response. Central Park Conservancy Board meeting. Agenda. Leadership review. Metropolitan Museum. Gala Committee. Seating revision. The most recent email from Blackwell Properties PR firm was the most alarming of all, Victoria. After multiple attempts to reach you over the past 5 days, we are formally notifying you that Archer Communications will be terminating our relationship with Blackwell Properties effective immediately. The recent incident involving your discriminatory comments has created an untenable situation that goes against our company's core values of inclusivity and respect. Furthermore, we must advise you that our attempts to contain this situation have been unsuccessful. The video has now been viewed over 15 million times across platforms. Major media outlets have run features on both the incident itself and what they are characterizing as a pattern of problematic behavior by you and potentially Blackwell Properties as a whole. Several former employees have come forward with allegations of discriminatory practices within your company, and at least 2 journalists are investigating these claims for upcoming pieces in major publications. Given these circumstances, we can no longer effectively represent your interests, nor do we wish to be associated with the positions expressed in the video. Samantha Archer, CEO, Archer Communications. Victoria stared at the screen, a cold weight settling in her stomach. This was not just a PR problem or a temporary social embarrassment. This was an existential threat to everything she had built. Her phone rang Thomas's ringtone, despite his note saying he would call tomorrow. Apparently, he had decided that whatever needed to be said could not wait. Thomas. She answered, unable to keep the relief from her voice. I just got home. Where are you? We need to discuss how to handle this situation. That is exactly why I am calling her husband, replied his voice uncharacteristically hard. I have spent the past 5 days dealing with the fallout from your behavior, Victoria. Do you have any idea what is happening to the company? I have just started going through the emails. We have lost 3 major development partners. Thomas cut in. The Tribeca project is dead. Hudson Yards is hanging by a thread. 4 board members have threatened to resign unless we take decisive action, and our stock has dropped 17% since the market opened Monday morning. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Thomas, we can weather this. We will hire a crisis management team, issue a carefully worded statement. It is too late for that, Thomas interrupted again, his voice weary now rather than angry. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning at 8. They are invoking the moral conduct clause in our corporate bylaws. They cannot do that, Victoria protested, panic rising in her throat. I am a founding partner. They cannot just remove me. They can, and they will, Thomas replied flatly. I have seen the votes. It is already decided. And you, Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper. Where do you stand in all this? There was a long pause before Thomas answered. I have spent 30 years building this company, Victoria. I have invested everything I have financially, professionally, personally. I cannot let it all collapse because of... He trailed off. Because of me. Victoria finished for him. You are siding with the board against your own wife. I am trying to salvage what can be salvaged, Thomas corrected. And right now that means creating distance between Blackwell Properties and the incident. The clinical way he referred to it, the incident, told Victoria everything she needed to know about where she stood. Not as his wife of nearly 3 decades, not as his partner in building an empire, but as a liability to be managed and mitigated. I have spoken with Gerald Thomas, continued, naming their longtime attorney. He has prepared paperwork for a separation. Given the circumstances, he advises that we move quickly to protect remaining assets. A separation. Victoria repeated the words, not quite processing. Thomas, you cannot be serious. Over one comment on an airplane. It is not just one comment. Victoria Thomas sighed, sounding suddenly older than his 58 years. It is what that comment revealed. About you. About views you apparently hold that I never knew about or perhaps chose not to see. And now, everyone sees it. There is video, Victoria. Undeniable, unspinnable video of my wife, the co-founder of a company that manages properties in the most diverse city in America, expressing disgust at having to share space with people of color. Put so bluntly, even Victoria could not formulate a defense. The reality of her situation was finally fully sinking in. This was not a temporary social embarrassment or a PR challenge to be managed. This was the beginning of an avalanche that threatened to bury everything she had spent her life building. I have tried, Victoria Thomas continued after her extended silence. I have spent the last 5 days in non-stop meetings with clients, investors, and partners. I have personally called every major stakeholder. I have brought in every favor I am owed, but the damage is too extensive. People do not want to be associated with you right now. So you are abandoning me? Victoria asked, her voice small. I am doing what is necessary to save the company and our remaining assets, Thomas replied. The movers will come on Friday for my remaining things. I think it is best if you are not there when they arrive. Gerald will be in touch tomorrow after the board meeting with the formal separation agreement. I am sorry it has come to this, Victoria, but you have left us no choice. The call ended, and Victoria sat motionless in her designer kitchen, surrounded by Italian marble and Viking appliances, by the trappings of a success that was evaporating before her eyes. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Manhattan skyline glittered indifferently, a constellation of lights that had once seemed to bend to her will, but now felt as distant and cold as the stars themselves. Victoria thought of reaching out to her own crisis management contacts, but the email from Archer Communications made it clear that door was closed. She considered calling some of the powerful friends she had cultivated over decades, but the radio silence from her social circle in the days since the incident suggested that would be futile. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria Blackwell was truly alone with the consequences of her actions, with no power, privilege, or connections to shield her from the storm she had created. The first formal disinvitation arrived by email on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the incident, as Victoria had begun to think of it, adopting Thomas's clinical phrasing. The Metropolitan Museum Gala Committee expressed regrets that her table reservation needed to be reallocated due to unprecedented demand. Victoria, who had been securing prime positioning at the gala for the past 5 years through generous donations, recognized the polite fiction for what it was, the first official notification of her social excommunication. By Wednesday, the pattern was unmistakable. The New York Botanical Garden rescinded her invitation to chair the annual spring luncheon. The Lincoln Center informed her that her box seats for the symphony season had been inadvertently double-booked and offered orchestra-level seats instead, tucked discreetly in the back where she would not be visible to other patrons. The Central Park Conservancy suggested she might prefer to contribute anonymously to their upcoming fundraiser rather than attending in person. Each message was wrapped in a veneer of politeness, cushioned with passive voice and regretful tones, but the subtext was clear. Victoria Blackwell's presence had become toxic, her social capital reduced to zero in the span of 3 weeks. Like a bird suddenly finding its familiar migration routes closed, Victoria found herself disoriented in a social landscape that had been her natural habitat for decades. The invisibility of a woman who had once commanded attention in any room was perhaps the cruelest aspect of her new reality. The country club was more direct. The membership committee, chaired by Margot Winters, who had once fawned over Victoria's connections to the Harrington Wells family, sent a formal letter indicating that her membership was under review following multiple complaints regarding conduct unbecoming a member. Her biometric access was temporarily suspended pending review, effectively barring her from the premises where she had spent countless Sundays brunching with fellow elites. Even her building the exclusive co-op where she and Thomas had occupied the penthouse for over a decade found subtle ways to communicate her changed status. The doorman, who had once greeted her by name with deferential smiles, now gave only the barest nod of acknowledgement. The elevator operator suddenly became fascinated with the control panel whenever she entered, avoiding eye contact entirely. The final indignity came when Victoria encountered Judith Abernathy, president of the co-op board, and once one of her closest social allies, in the mailroom. Victoria Judith acknowledged with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "I have been meaning to speak with you." Judith Victoria replied, attempting to maintain the warm familiarity that had characterized their relationship for years. "How are you? We should get lunch soon." Judith's smile became even more strained. "Actually, Victoria, that is what I wanted to discuss. The board has received concerns from several residents about the media attention surrounding the building." Victoria stiffened. "What sort of concerns? There have been photographers outside, reporters asking questions of the staff. It is creating a disturbance for residents who value their privacy." Judith's voice took on a practiced diplomatic tone. "We were hoping you might consider using the service entrance for the time being, just until things settle down." The service entrance, used by delivery personnel, maintenance workers, and household staff, never by residents and certainly never by someone of Victoria's stature. The suggestion was so shocking that Victoria could only stare at Judith, speechless for perhaps the first time in her adult life. "Of course, it is entirely up to you," Judith continued, misinterpreting Victoria's silence as consideration rather than shock. "We just thought it might be more comfortable for everyone concerned." I see Victoria finally managed her voice distant and hollow. "How thoughtful of the board to consider my comfort." Judith had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but she did not retract the suggestion. "These are unusual circumstances, Victoria. I am sure you understand." But Victoria did not understand, not fully, not yet. She was still operating under the assumption that this was a temporary setback, a social challenge to be navigated with the same strategic finesse she had applied to her ascent. She still believed on some fundamental level that her wealth would insulate her from the worst consequences, that her status was dented but not destroyed. It was not until she returned to the echoing emptiness of her penthouse, Thomas now permanently relocated to a luxury condo downtown, that the reality began to truly sink in. On her marble counter was a pile of mail that had been gathering dust during her distracted weeks of damage control. Among the usual luxury catalogs and solicitations for charity donations was a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message: "People like you do not belong in New York. We know where you live. We are watching." Victoria's hands trembled as she set down the letter. This was not just social exile. This was something darker, more threatening. For the first time, she felt not just isolated, but vulnerable in a way her wealth had always previously shielded her from. The fortress of privilege she had constructed so carefully over decades was crumbling around her, and Victoria Blackwell was discovering just how exposed life could be when the protective barriers of money and status were suddenly stripped away. A moral conduct clause. Victoria stared at Gerald Weinstein, the silver-haired attorney who had represented the Blackwells for over 20 years. "That is absurd. We have been married for 27 years. Gerald adjusted his glasses, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "The prenuptial agreement is quite clear, Victoria. Section 8, paragraph 3 states that any conduct by either party that brings significant public disrepute or professional damage to the other party constitutes grounds for dissolution with modified asset division. Thomas's legal team is arguing quite persuasively, I might add, that your recent actions meet this threshold." They were sitting in Gerald's corner office at Weinstein Goldberg and Associates, surrounded by the trappings of old money legal success, leather-bound law books, discreetly displayed awards, and panoramic views of Central Park. Once this environment had felt like an extension of Victoria's own world, a place where her wealth commanded respect and preferential treatment. Now it felt like foreign territory. "And you agree with them?" Victoria asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "After everything Thomas and I have built together?" Gerald sighed, setting down the prenuptial agreement he had himself drafted, nearly 3 decades earlier. "My personal opinion is irrelevant, Victoria. As your attorney, I am obligated to inform you that Thomas has a strong legal position. The documentation of the incident is indisputable. The business consequences are quantifiable. Blackwell Properties has lost 3 major development partners and approximately $145 million in market capitalization in the past month alone." Victoria's mind raced, searching for a counter-strategy. "What about my contributions to the company I have been co-CEO for 20 years? I have brought in half our major clients, and you will be compensated for that," Gerald assured her, though his tone lacked conviction. "But given the circumstances and the specific language of the prenup, the compensation will be significantly less than a standard 50-50 division. Thomas's team is proposing a 78-22 split in his favor, with you retaining the Hamptons property and a lump sum settlement." 22%. Victoria's voice rose in outrage. "That is highway robbery. I built that company as much as he did." "They are arguing that your actions have cost the company far more than 28% of its value," Gerald explained patiently. "And they have the financial reports to back it up. The Hudson Yards project alone. I do not want to hear about Hudson Yards." Victoria snapped, rising from her chair to pace the expensive carpet. "I want to hear how you are going to fight this ridiculous proposal." Gerald's expression remained professionally neutral, but there was a hint of resignation in his eyes. "I will certainly negotiate on your behalf, Victoria, but I need you to understand the reality of your position. The courts tend to uphold moral conduct clauses, especially when there is clear documentation of the conduct in question and measurable damages to the other party." The discussion continued for another hour, with Gerald laying out options that grew increasingly unpalatable. Victoria could fight the divorce terms, but that would mean a public court battle that would further damage her already shattered reputation. She could attempt mediation, but Thomas had made it clear he was not interested in compromise. She could agree to the proposed terms, salvaging what she could from the wreckage of her marriage and moving forward. "I need time to think," Victoria finally said, gathering her Hermes bag and standing to leave. "And I expect you to come up with better options than surrendering 78% of what I have spent my life building." Gerald nodded, but his expression was not encouraging. "Of course. Take the weekend to consider everything we have discussed." "But Victoria," he added as she reached the door, "I would advise against making any major financial moves in the interim. The court has already approved Thomas's request to freeze joint assets during proceedings. Victoria froze her hand on the doorknob. He froze our accounts. All of them. I am afraid so, Gerald confirmed. It is standard procedure in high-asset divorces, especially when there are concerns about potential asset dissipation. So what am I supposed to live on? Victoria, demanded the pitch of her voice rising with panic. You still have access to your personal accounts and credit cards, Gerald assured her. Just not the joint assets or company accounts. Victoria left the law office in a daze, the magnitude of her situation finally beginning to penetrate the protective shell of denial she had constructed. The joint assets represented the vast majority of her wealth. Her personal accounts, while substantial by most standards, were a pittance compared to the fortune she had grown accustomed to commanding. Like a migrating bird suddenly finding itself caught in a storm, Victoria felt buffeted by forces beyond her control, her usual navigation tools rendered useless by circumstances she had never anticipated. Back at the penthouse, a new email awaited her from Eliza. Victoria opened it with trembling fingers, desperate for any connection to her daughter, who had been maintaining radio silence since the disastrous wedding. Mother, I have spent the past month trying to process what happened and what it reveals about you. After much reflection and many conversations with James and his family, I have come to a difficult decision. I cannot maintain a relationship with someone who holds such views that directly denigrate my new family and the values I have come to embrace. James's relatives, whom you so casually dismissed as those people, have shown me more warmth, acceptance, and genuine love in the past month than I have felt in years of navigating your social expectations and conditional approval. Perhaps someday, if you truly understand the harm your words and attitudes cause and make genuine amends, we might rebuild some form of relationship. But for now, I need to protect myself and my new family from your toxic influence. I have instructed the moving company to collect my remaining belongings from the penthouse next week. Please ensure they have access. Eliza Victoria read the email 3 times, each reading more painful than the last. The clinical tone, the formal language, this was not her daughter's voice. This was the voice of someone who had emotionally severed ties, who was treating their own mother like a toxic business relationship to be professionally terminated. When Thomas called that evening, Victoria was already halfway through her second bottle of Chateau Margaux, the $2,000 wine doing little to numb the pain of Eliza's rejection. I am giving you one last chance, Victoria, Thomas said without preamble. Issue a public apology. Take responsibility. Show some genuine remorse and willingness to change. If you do that, I will consider a more equitable settlement. Victoria's pride, the one thing she had left, flared hot and bright. Apologize for what? For expressing concerns about my comfort and safety. For having standards, I will not grovel for public approval. Thomas. Not even for you. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Victoria wondered if the call had disconnected. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice was quiet but resolute. Then there is nothing more to discuss. The lawyers will handle everything from here. He paused. Goodbye, Victoria. The line went dead, and with it, the last tether connecting Victoria to the life she had spent decades constructing. Family fortune, social standing, all were slipping away victims of a single moment of unguarded prejudice that had revealed the ugliness she had always kept carefully concealed beneath her polished exterior. 6 months after the incident, Victoria Blackwell stood in the echoing emptiness of her penthouse, watching as auction house employees carefully wrapped and labeled the artifacts of her former life. The Italian marble dining table where she had hosted power brokers and social elites. The Picasso sketch that had graced her entryway, a status symbol as much as an art piece. The collection of first edition books she had never read but had displayed prominently to project intellectual sophistication. The divorce had been finalized with brutal efficiency, the moral conduct clause proving as damaging as Gerald had warned. Victoria had received the Hamptons property, which she was now being forced to sell to cover mounting legal bills and living expenses, and a settlement that, while substantial by ordinary standards, represented a mere fraction of the fortune she had once commanded as co-CEO of Blackwell Properties. The auction had not been her choice. It had become a necessity after 3 consecutive months of being unable to cover the penthouse's maintenance fees that had once seemed trivial but now loomed as insurmountable obstacles. The co-op board, led by her former friend Judith Abernathy, had been unsympathetic to her requests for patience. "The bylaws are quite clear, Victoria," Judith had informed her with poorly concealed satisfaction. 3 months of unpaid maintenance fees triggers the enforcement clause. You have 30 days to bring the account current or face eviction proceedings. The humiliation of that conversation had been the final push Victoria needed to accept reality. She could no longer afford the lifestyle her former wealth had sustained. The penthouse would have to be sold, her possessions liquidated, her expectations dramatically recalibrated. Her financial advisor, Martin Goldstein, had laid out her situation with brutal clarity at their last meeting. "Your liquid assets will be depleted within 18 months at your current spending rate," he had explained, sliding a spreadsheet across his desk. "The Hamptons property sale will buy you perhaps another year, assuming you can find a buyer in this market. After that?" He had trailed off, the implication clear. Victoria had stared at the numbers, unable to reconcile them with her self-image. "This cannot be right. There must be investments accounts you are not considering." Martin had shaken his head. "Most of your wealth was tied up in Blackwell Properties stock, which has lost 62% of its value since your departure from the company. The settlement gave you significantly less than you would have received in a standard divorce. And your personal spending habits." He had gestured to another column on the spreadsheet highlighting monthly expenditures that still reflected her former lifestyle rather than her new reality. The final blow to her financial stability had come when she attempted to leverage her connections to secure consulting work with former business associates. The responses had ranged from polite deflection to outright rejection. One former colleague, braver or perhaps crueler than the others, had put it bluntly, "Victoria, surely you understand that no one can afford to be publicly associated with you right now. It is not personal. It is just business. Just business." The phrase that had once been her mantra now returned as a weapon wielded against her. As the auction house employees continued their work, Victoria's phone rang, a rare occurrence these days. The caller ID showed her bank, specifically her personal banker, who had once fawned over her deposits and facilitated her every financial need. "Miss Blackwell." He began, his tone formal rather than familiar. "I am calling regarding your accounts with First Manhattan Bank." "Yes," Robert Victoria replied, attempting to maintain the authoritative tone she had once used with service providers. "I am afraid there has been a decision by our risk management department to end our banking relationship. We will be closing your accounts effective 30 days from today." Victoria gripped the phone tighter. "On what grounds?" There was a slight pause. "The bank reserves the right to terminate accounts at its discretion. This decision is final. You will receive formal notification by mail, along with instructions for transferring your funds to another institution." After the call ended, Victoria sank onto a chair that would soon belong to someone else. Banking relationships, like her social connections, were being severed one by one. Her credit cards had already been declined at several establishments, not for lack of funds, but because the issuing banks had similarly chosen to reassess their relationship with her. The auction house manager approached, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Blackwell, we have completed the inventory. Based on current market conditions, we estimate the auction will realize between $1.2 and $1.5 million. After our commission and the outstanding maintenance fees, you should receive approximately $1.1 million. Victoria nodded numbly. Just 18 months earlier, she had spent nearly that amount on a single piece of jewelry, a diamond bracelet she had worn exactly twice before growing bored with it. As she signed the auction agreement authorizing the sale of possessions that had once defined her status, Victoria Blackwell confronted the stark reality that money, at least the kind of money that had insulated her from consequences her entire adult life, was rapidly running out. And with it, her last defense against a world that no longer recognized her claim to privilege. 1 year to the day after the incident that had derailed her life, Victoria Blackwell stood behind the counter at Horizon Car Rentals in Chicago, O'Hare's Terminal 3, wearing a polyester uniform vest that was perpetually one size too large. The cheap fabric itched against her neck, a constant irritant that served as a physical reminder of her fall from grace. "And will you be needing the additional collision coverage, Mr. Peterson?" she asked, her voice a flat, practiced monotone. The sales script had been drilled into her during the 3-day training program, the longest period of formal instruction she had received since finishing her MBA at Wharton nearly 30 years earlier. I do not know. My personal insurance should cover it, right?" the man said, a salesman from Ohio who was already annoyed by his delayed flight. "Sir, your personal policy likely has a high deductible," Victoria recited mechanically. "Our peace of mind. Waiver covers you completely. No deductible, no questions. Yeah, fine. Whatever. Better at it." He did not look up from his phone. "Okay," she said, her fingers moving over the sticky keyboard that she now sanitized twice daily with disinfectant wipes she purchased herself. "That will be an additional $29.99 per day. Please sign here on the screen." This was her life now, a series of small, grinding humiliations. She who had once managed a staff of dozens at Blackwell Properties was now upselling insurance to men in wrinkled shirts. She who had once commanded charity boards and social committees now worried about her customer service score and the threat of being written up by her 24-year-old shift manager, Aiden Rodriguez. Her fall had been as swift as it was complete. After the auction of her possessions and the forced sale of the Hamptons property, Victoria had found herself with liquid assets of approximately $2.1 million, a sum that would have once seemed substantial, but now represented the entirety of her financial future. Financial advisors had painted a stark picture, even with careful management and drastically reduced living expenses. That amount would sustain her for perhaps 15 years at most. She needed income. But who would hire Victoria Blackwell? Her name had become toxic in New York real estate circles. Her former social connections now actively avoided association with her. The viral video had made her instantly recognizable to potential employers, many of whom had diversity and inclusion policies that made hiring her a non-starter. She had exhausted every possible avenue in New York. She had met with headhunters who took her calls but never followed up. She had reached out to former clients who had once treated her like royalty, but now claimed their calendars were perpetually full. She had even attempted to launch a private consulting practice, only to find that her reputation preceded her potential clients, quietly canceling meetings after doing basic Google searches. Victoria had hired 3 different crisis management firms, each one promising to rehabilitate her image. Each had taken her money and produced glossy strategies that, when implemented, yielded no results. The narrative had solidified. Victoria Blackwell was a racist who had been caught on camera, and no amount of carefully crafted statements or charitable donations could change that fundamental storyline. After months of rejections and unreturned calls, Victoria had finally accepted reality. She needed to leave New York, change her name professionally, if not legally, and start over somewhere her infamy might not follow her quite so closely. Chicago had been chosen almost at random, a major city, but not New York familiar enough to navigate, but far enough to represent a clean break. She had rented a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in Rosemont near the end of the Blue Line, where the walls were so thin she could hear her neighbors' arguments and the theme song to the game show they watched every night at 7:30. Her commute was a 45-minute train ride, standing room only, for most of the route, surrounded by the very public she had once so desperately avoided. The first few weeks she had attempted to maintain some semblance of her former style designer clothes. Careful, make-up hair, perfectly styled. But the practicalities of public transportation, long hours on her feet, and the obvious disconnect between her appearance and her position had eventually worn down her resistance. Now, a year into her new life, Victoria Blackwell, who went by Vicky on her name tag, had adapted in ways she would once have considered unthinkable. Her silver blonde hair, once maintained with $500 monthly appointments at a prestigious Manhattan salon, was now a dull dishwater gray cut in a practical bob at a strip mall salon for $35 every 6 weeks. Her manicured nails had been replaced by short, unpolished fingernails that were better suited to the constant typing and paper handling her job required. Her wardrobe, once filled with designer labels and bespoke pieces, now consisted primarily of washable slacks from department store sales and button-up shirts that could withstand repeated wearings between dry cleaning. The Manolo Blahniks had been replaced by sensible shoes that could endure 8-hour shifts on the hard airport flooring. The physical toll was significant back pain from standing wrist strain from the repetitive motion of scanning documents, headaches from the constant fluorescent lighting. But the emotional toll was far greater. Each day brought new indignities. The dismissive tone from business travelers who barely glanced at her. The condescension from her younger co-workers who spoke to her, slowly assuming her age, made her technology challenged. The constant monitoring of her upselling metrics by Aiden, who had been promoted to shift manager directly out of college and seemed to take particular pleasure in coaching her performance. "Vicky, your peace of mind. Waiver conversion rate was only 32% yesterday," he would say, peering at his tablet with exaggerated concern. "The company target is 40%. Let us role-play some more effective selling techniques." Victoria would nod, swallowing both pride and retorts, aware that she was one poor performance review away from unemployment. The $14.75 per hour she earned at Horizon Car Rentals, plus the occasional commission on successful upsells, was the only thing standing between her and the accelerated depletion of her remaining savings. This was not a temporary setback or a brief humbling before an inevitable comeback. This was her life now. A life of invisibility, insignificance, and service to people who would once have been serving her. Victoria's studio apartment was a far cry from the 4,000-square-foot Upper East Side penthouse she had once called home. The entire space could have fit into the master bathroom of her former residence. The walls were painted a dingy off-white that no amount of cleaning could brighten. The kitchenette consisted of a 2-burner electric stove, a mini refrigerator, and approximately 2 square feet of counter space. The bathroom featured a shower stall so small that Victoria had to turn sideways to wash her hair. But it was hers, the one private space in a life that had become painfully public. Her few remaining possessions, the items she could not bear to part with during the auction, were arranged with care to create some semblance of her former aesthetic. A small Waterford crystal vase, a framed Hermes scarf she had once worn casually, but now preserved as art, a single sterling silver picture frame containing a photo of Eliza at her college graduation. It was this photo that Victoria found herself staring at one evening after a particularly grueling shift. She had been scrolling mindlessly through her phone, one of the few luxuries she still permitted herself, when an Instagram notification appeared. Someone she followed had liked a post from Lady Diana Harrington Wells. Victoria had been blocked from Eliza's social media accounts months ago, but Lady Diana had never bothered to block her, perhaps not considering her significant enough to warrant the effort. With a sense of foreboding mixed with desperate curiosity, Victoria tapped on the notification. The image that filled her screen struck her like a physical blow. It showed Eliza and James both beaming, standing on the steps of a nondescript government building. Eliza wore a simple cream dress, elegant in its simplicity. James was handsome in a blue suit. Between them, with an arm around each, stood Lady Diana, her dark, elegant face radiant with joy. The caption read, Some moments do not need grand ceremonies or elaborate celebrations. They just need love and family. Congratulations to the newlyweds who made it official their way. #love wins. Family matters. Victoria's hand trembled as she enlarged the image, searching for any hint that this was perhaps an old photo, a throwback to some previous event. But the date stamp in the corner confirmed this had been taken just 3 days ago. Eliza had eloped. Her only daughter had gotten married truly legally, married not just the elaborate society wedding that had been reduced to a cold formality, and Victoria had not been invited, had not been informed, had not even known it was happening. The phone slipped from her numb fingers onto the worn carpet. Victoria sat motionless, the full weight of her isolation crushing down upon her. She was not just uninvited to her daughter's wedding. She was unmentioned, unacknowledged, unmourned. In the background, through the thin walls, she could hear her neighbor's television, the familiar theme song of their nightly game show, the canned laughter and applause serving as a surreal soundtrack to her silent grief. This, then, was rock bottom. Not the loss of her wealth, her status, her comfort. Those had been external trappings, however precious. This was the loss of her very identity as a mother, the one role she had thought inviolable, the one connection that would inevitably draw Eliza back to her eventually, like a bird who returns to find its nest destroyed, and its young flown Victoria was confronting the reality that some losses could not be recouped, some damage could not be repaired. The fundamental relationships that had given her life meaning had been severed not by external circumstances, but by her own actions and the attitudes they had revealed. For the first time since the auction house had taken her possessions, Victoria Blackwell wept not the controlled, elegant tears she had once permitted herself in moments of calculated vulnerability, but harsh, ugly sobs that racked her body and left her gasping for breath. When the storm finally passed, leaving her hollow and exhausted, Victoria found herself staring at her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. The woman who looked back at her was a stranger, older, diminished, stripped of the armor of privilege and pretense that had defined her for decades. "Who are you now?" she whispered to the unfamiliar face. For the first time in her life, Victoria Blackwell had no ready answer. The December afternoon brought a particular quality of light to O'Hare's Terminal 3, a flat, gray illumination that seemed to drain color from everything it touched. Victoria moved mechanically through her shift processing rental returns and reciting the same scripted questions and responses she had delivered thousands of times over the past months. The terminal buzzed with pre-holiday activity travelers rushing to reach destinations before Christmas, their faces tight with the particular stress of winter travel. Victoria processed them efficiently, her customer service mask firmly in place, her personal thoughts locked away behind the dull professional smile she had perfected. "And how is your vehicle today, Mr. Donovan?" she asked, scanning the barcode on the rental agreement of a middle-aged businessman in a rumpled suit. "Fine, fine," he muttered, not looking up from his phone. "Just need the receipt for my expense report." Victoria nodded, completing the transaction with practiced movements. "The receipt has been emailed to the address on file. Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" He was already walking away, receipt in hand, before she finished the sentence. Victoria reset her expression and turned to the next customer. The brief interaction already fading from memory, indistinguishable from hundreds of similar exchanges that filled her days. During a rare lull in the afternoon rush, Victoria was cleaning the counter with disinfectant wipes, a task Aiden insisted upon between customers, despite the janitorial staff that cleaned each night when a burst of laughter, genuine and bright, cut through the terminal's dull roar. The sound was so out of place in the ambient noise of frustrated travelers and airport announcements that Victoria flinched and looked up. A group in immaculate Delta Airlines uniforms was walking past the Horizon rental counter, heading from the arrivals level toward the employee shuttle bay. They were pilots and flight attendants, their rollerboard bags gliding silently behind them, moving with purpose and an easy camaraderie that made Victoria's stomach clench with a feeling so old it was almost foreign envy. Leading them was a tall man, his uniform crisp, the 4 stripes of a captain prominent on his shoulders. He was laughing at something a flight attendant had said, his posture perfect, his bearing confident without being arrogant. He exuded an aura of calm, earned authority. It was Captain Dominic Reynolds. Victoria's breath hitched. The cleaning rag she was using to wipe down the counter fell from her suddenly numb hand. He looked different than he had a year ago, younger, somehow lighter. In the months since their fateful encounter, Victoria had heard fragments of information about him through airport gossip, a surprisingly efficient network that crossed company and terminal boundaries. Captain Reynolds was no longer just a line pilot. He had been promoted to chief pilot for Delta's Northeast region, responsible for training and standards. The man whose career Victoria had tried to derail was now shaping the next generation of pilots. He was a legend in the industry. His quiet stand at JFK had become a case study in airline training programs, a model for how to respond to discrimination with dignity and principle. He was everything Victoria had once been, respected, admired, in charge, but real, earned through character rather than wealth. As the crew passed the horizon counter, Captain Reynolds's gaze swept the concourse with the habitual awareness of someone trained to constantly assess their surroundings. His eyes passed over the rental car area, over Victoria herself, without a flicker of recognition. He continued his conversation, moving smoothly toward the exit with his crew in tow. He did not see her. Why would he? She was no longer Victoria Blackwell, the viral villain of that JFK incident. She was no longer even Victoria Blackwell, co-CEO of a major real estate development firm. She was a middle-aged woman in a cheap polyester vest, part of the beige, forgettable background of service workers that travelers like her former self had been trained not to truly see. As Captain Reynolds and his crew disappeared around a corner toward the employee shuttle area, their laughter fading into the ambient noise of the terminal, Victoria remained frozen behind the counter, a cleaning rag crumpled in her fist, the taste of something bitter and final in her mouth. Like a bird watching the soaring flight of a species whose migrations it could no longer join, Victoria felt the absolute crushing totality of her irrelevance. It was worse than the poverty, worse than the discomfort of her diminished circumstances. It was the complete erasure of her former self, the realization that she had become invisible, not through any external agency, but through the natural consequence of losing the only things that had made her visible in the first place: money, status, power. She had lost everything. And the person who had catalyzed that loss did not even recognize her existence. The irony was not lost on Victoria. She who had once looked through service workers as if they were invisible had now become what she had dismissed, just another anonymous face in a uniform providing a service that the privileged barely acknowledged. "Excuse me, miss. Is this counter open?" The voice pulled Victoria back from her frozen state. She blinked, forcing herself to focus on the customer who had approached her counter. Her customer service mask slipped automatically into place, the professional smile that never reached her eyes. "Yes, sir. Welcome to Horizon Rentals. How can I help you today?" And then she saw them, really saw them, and her smile froze. Standing before her was a black family of 4. The father, tall and distinguished in a tailored overcoat, had a kind face with intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. The mother, elegant in a camel-colored coat, had her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her makeup subtle but perfect. Between them were 2 children, a boy of about 10 and a girl who looked around 8, both vibrating with the particular energy of children who had been confined to an airplane for hours and were finally free to move. "We have a reservation," the man said, his voice warm and cultured. "Under Bennett. Dr. William Bennett. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she typed the name into the system. The family before her was a mirror image of the Garcia family from that fateful flight. Different faces, different names, but the same dynamic. Successful, well-dressed professionals with well-behaved, excited children. The same type of family that had triggered her disgust and entitlement a year ago. "Are you taking a vacation, Dr. Bennett?" The question slipped out unbidden, a deviation from the script that Aiden had drilled into her, which focused exclusively on the rental details and upselling opportunities, never on personal inquiries that might slow the transaction. Dr. Bennett looked mildly surprised at the personal question, but nodded with a smile. "Yes, we are here visiting my wife's family for the holidays. The kids are excited to see their cousins, are not you?" The children nodded enthusiastically. The girl whose bright pink headband matched her sneakers piped up. Grandma said, "We are going to bake cookies and make snow angels." "That sounds wonderful," Victoria replied, her voice softer than usual. Something was happening inside her, a strange, uncomfortable shifting like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface of her carefully constructed professional facade. She found herself looking at Dr. Bennett and seeing not a threat or an intrusion, but simply a father taking his family on vacation. She saw Mrs. Bennett not as an object of comparison or judgment, but as a mother who had likely spent the flight entertaining children and was now ready for some rest. She saw the children not as noisy inconveniences, but as exactly what they were. Excited kids looking forward to holiday fun. And most disturbingly, she saw herself not as she was now in her polyester vest behind the Horizon counter, but as she had been that day at JFK. She saw her own face twisted with disgust, heard her own voice saying those words that had destroyed her life. "It is those people. I did not pay $7,000 for a business class ticket to feel unsafe." The memory of Captain Reynolds' face flashed before her, not angry, just profoundly tired, and suddenly, with a clarity that was almost painful, Victoria understood. She understood what he had seen when he looked at her, what everyone on that plane had seen, not a woman concerned for her comfort, but a person so blinded by prejudice and privilege that she could not recognize her own ugliness. "Miss, is everything okay?" Dr. Bennett's voice broke through her reverie, concern evident in his tone. Victoria realized she had been staring the reservation details half entered on her screen. "Yes, I am sorry," she stammered, feeling a flush of shame creep up her neck. "Just system lag." She forced her fingers to continue typing, pulling up the Bennett family's reservation for a full-size SUV. As she processed the rental, walking through the required steps, and offering the various add-ons her job demanded, Victoria was acutely aware of a choice presenting itself. A small choice, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but perhaps the first real choice she had made since her life had collapsed around her. She could treat this family with the same subtle disdain she had shown countless customers before them, the barely concealed impatience that had become her default state. Or she could see them, truly see them as fellow humans deserving of basic dignity and respect. It was not redemption. It was not even particularly noble. But in that moment, faced with a family that so closely mirrored the one whose presence had triggered her downfall, Victoria Blackwell made a choice that was not driven by external pressure or survival necessity, but by the faintest flicker of something long dormant within her recognition of another's humanity. "Your SUV is in space. B-42, she said, her voice warmer than it had been in months as she handed Dr. Bennett the keys. "The children might enjoy our free hot chocolate station near the exit doors. They make it fresh every hour." The girl's eyes lit up. "Hot chocolate. Can we, Dad, Doctor?" Bennett looked momentarily surprised by the helpful suggestion from the rental car agent. Such personal touches were rare in the transactional space of airport services, but he nodded with a smile. "Thank you. That is very kind." It was such a small thing, this moment of genuine human connection, But as the Bennett family moved away from her counter, Victoria felt something shift inside her, a hairline crack in the defensive wall she had built around what remained of her heart. Over the following weeks, Victoria began to notice how different her interactions were with customers of different backgrounds. With white business travelers, especially men in expensive suits, she was deferential, almost obsequious, a reflex from her former life when such people had been peers to be cultivated. With customers of color, particularly those who appeared less affluent, she was efficient but cool, maintaining a subtle distance that was not quite rudeness, but certainly was not warmth. These patterns had been invisible to her until now. Automatic behaviors born of attitudes so deeply embedded, she had not recognized them as choices rather than inevitable responses. But once seen, they could not be unseen, and Victoria found herself making conscious efforts to adjust, not dramatically, not performatively, but in small, consistent ways. She accepted Maria's invitation to Rosalita's, expecting an awkward evening of forced conversation with strangers. Instead, she found herself genuinely enjoying the unpretentious food and the company of people who had no idea who she had been and therefore no expectations or judgments based on her past. The conversation ranged from workplace gossip to family stories to spirited debates about television shows Victoria had never watched during her former life of charity galas and social climbing. "You should try the taquitos at El Pueblito next time," advised Carlos, a baggage handler who moonlighted as a DJ on weekends. "Their salsa will change your life." "But their horchata is terrible," countered Maria with a laugh. "Watery and flavorless. For good horchata, you need to go to La Cantina on Bryn Mawr." Victoria, who had once dined at Michelin-starred restaurants where the amuse-bouche cost more than this entire meal, found herself taking mental notes about neighborhood taquerias, with the same seriousness she had once applied to remembering which vintages of Bordeaux were preferred by particular business associates. At work, Aiden Rodriguez announced a mandatory diversity training session for all employees, part of Horizon's corporate initiative to foster a more inclusive workplace environment. The old Victoria would have dismissed such training as pointless political correctness, a waste of time better spent on revenue-generating activities. The new Victoria, or perhaps more accurately the Victoria in transition, found herself approaching the session with cautious openness. The trainer, a young black woman named Jasmine Taylor, with degrees in organizational psychology and social work, began not with abstract concepts or accusatory frameworks, but with stories, personal accounts from customers and employees who had experienced discrimination in travel settings. "What we are talking about today is not just corporate policy," Jasmine explained. "It is about real human experiences. When someone feels unwelcome, unsafe, or disrespected because of their identity, that is not just a bad customer service moment, that is a wound that accumulates with other wounds to create lasting harm." Victoria listened. Really listened in a way she never would have before. The stories Jasmine shared of subtle dismissals of being watched more closely while browsing rental car upgrades, of having payment methods questioned when customers of other backgrounds were not subjected to the same scrutiny, did not sound like the exaggerated grievances she would once have dismissed them as. They sounded like the exact behaviors she had practiced unthinkingly throughout her life. One story in particular struck home, a black executive describing how a car rental agent had repeatedly directed questions about the luxury vehicle he was renting to his white colleague, despite the fact that the reservation was in his name and he was the one paying. "I have been that agent," Victoria realized with a jolt of recognition. "I have done exactly that." The training was not transformative in the way of dramatic revelations or emotional breakthroughs. It was educational in the most basic sense, providing information Victoria had never bothered to seek out, perspectives she had never considered worth understanding, patterns she had never recognized in her own behavior. At one point during a small group exercise, Victoria found herself paired with Tariq, a 20-something colleague who worked in the returns department. "I do not get why we have to do these trainings," he said with the casual confidence of youth. "I treat everyone the same. I do not see color." 6 months earlier, Victoria would have nodded in agreement with this sentiment. Now, having begun to recognize her own patterns of differential treatment, she heard the statement differently. "I used to think that too," she said, surprising herself with the admission. "But I am starting to realize that not seeing differences can mean not seeing real experiences, not seeing obstacles some people face that others do not." Tariq looked skeptical. "So you are saying we should treat people differently based on their race? That sounds like the opposite of equality." Victoria considered this formulating a response that was not defensive or preachy, but reflected her own emerging understanding. I am learning that treating everyone exactly the same does not always result in everyone being treated well. Sometimes it means ignoring real differences in how the world responds to different people." It was not an eloquent explanation, and Victoria was not sure she had articulated her thoughts clearly. But the attempt itself to engage genuinely with these ideas, rather than dismissing them, marked a significant departure from her former approach to such discussions. As weeks turned into months, Victoria's transformation remained subtle, gradual, marked not by dramatic gestures or public declarations, but by small adjustments in everyday interactions. She began to build genuine, if limited, friendships with colleagues like Maria and Carlos' relationships, based not on what they could do for her, but on simple human connection. She discovered neighborhood restaurants and shops where her limited budget stretched further places her former self would never have deigned to enter, but that now provided both practical resources and unexpected moments of community. These changes were not driven by virtue or some noble quest for redemption. Victoria harbored no illusions about herself. She knew that much of her adaptation was born of necessity rather than moral evolution. Her compliance with workplace diversity expectations was as much about job security as personal growth. Her friendships with colleagues were motivated partly by simple human loneliness. Her more respectful treatment of customers from all backgrounds was influenced by awareness of how quickly she could lose what little she had left if another incident occurred. But even motivations rooted in self-interest could produce genuine change. Victoria was discovering what many before her had learned through hardship, that sometimes doing the right thing for the wrong reasons still created space for growth. That practice could precede belief that behavior could shape attitude rather than merely reflecting it. It was not redemption. It was not even in many ways particularly admirable, but it was movement, halting, inconsistent, imperfect movement away from the person she had been and toward someone she might yet become. The community health clinic on Chicago's West Side was a far cry from the gleaming corporate offices Victoria had once commanded. The building itself was a repurposed school, its institutional architecture softened by colorful murals and potted plants, its waiting room filled with well-worn furniture and dog-eared magazines. The pay was modest, the hours long, and the work often tedious, but it was work with purpose, a concept Victoria Blackwell was only beginning to understand at 54. Her journey from Horizon Car Rentals to Grove Community Health Center had not been direct or deliberate. It had begun, like many significant changes in her life, with a chance encounter. Maria's daughter had developed a persistent cough that required medical attention, but without health insurance, her options were limited. Victoria had accompanied them to Grove, where the sliding scale fees made treatment accessible even to those of modest means. While waiting for Maria's daughter to be seen, Victoria had noticed the overwhelmed receptionist struggling to manage the flow of patients' paperwork and phone calls. Without thinking, she had stepped in to help organize the intake forms, drawing on organizational skills honed over decades in business. The clinic director, Dr. Rachel Patel, had noticed Victoria's intervention and struck up a conversation. By the end of the visit, Victoria had volunteered to help streamline the clinic's administrative processes, initially as a one-time project, then as a weekly volunteer, and eventually as a paid administrative coordinator when the position opened. The transition had not been seamless. Victoria's managerial instincts, developed in environments where she held unquestioned authority, initially clashed with the clinic's collaborative culture. Her first performance review had included feedback about her occasionally dismissive tone and tendency to override rather than engage with differing perspectives. Rather than rejecting the criticism or defending her approach, Victoria had surprised herself by asking for specific examples and concrete suggestions for improvement. It was not that she had suddenly become humble or eager for personal growth. Rather, she had learned through hard experience that adaptation was necessary for survival. 2 years after the JFK incident, Victoria's life bore little resemblance to her former existence. Her apartment, though still small, had been upgraded to a one-bedroom in a slightly better neighborhood, a modest improvement reflecting her slightly improved financial situation. The space was furnished with a mixture of second-hand finds and carefully chosen new pieces, creating an environment that was comfortable, if not luxurious. Her social circle, once defined by wealth and influence, now consisted primarily of colleagues from the clinic neighbors in her apartment building and a few friends from her Horizon days, including Maria, who had successfully completed her business degree and moved into a management position. These relationships lacked the strategic value her former connections had offered, but they provided something Victoria was learning to value: more authenticity. There were no hidden agendas in her Friday dinners with clinic staff, no careful calculations of social advantage in her occasional movie nights with Maria and her children. These were simply people who enjoyed each other's company, sharing experiences and support without expectation of return. Even her appearance had evolved to reflect her changed circumstances and priorities. Her hair, now naturally gray, was cut in a practical but flattering style that required minimal maintenance. Her wardrobe consisted of well-made basics rather than designer labels chosen for durability and versatility rather than status signaling. Her makeup was minimal, applied with efficiency rather than the painstaking precision that had once been part of her armor. The most significant change, however, was internal rather than external. Victoria had begun to recognize the person she had been with a clarity that was sometimes painful, but increasingly liberating. She saw now how her sense of superiority had isolated her, how her pursuit of status had consumed her, how her treatment of others had eventually resulted in her own undoing. This recognition was not accompanied by dramatic declarations of transformation or public gestures of atonement. Victoria remained essentially private about her past, sharing her full story only with a therapist she had begun seeing 6 months earlier. Another adaptation that would have been unthinkable in her previous life, when therapy was viewed as weakness rather than strength. Her weekly sessions with Dr. Moreno were not focused on processing her fall from grace or nursing grievances about the consequences she had faced. Instead, they centered on understanding the patterns that had shaped her life and developing healthier ways of engaging with herself and others. "I am not sure I like the person I was," she admitted during one session, the words emerging with surprising ease after months of building trust. "But I am not sure I know how to be anyone else." Perhaps the question is not about becoming someone completely different, Dr. Moreno had suggested. Perhaps it is about allowing different aspects of yourself to emerge, aspects that were always there but never had the space to develop. Victoria was still contemplating this perspective as she sat at her desk at Grove Community Health Center reviewing the day's appointment schedule and preparing the necessary files. On her desktop computer, a news alert caught her eye, a feature story about Captain Dominic Reynolds, who had just launched a mentorship program for young pilots of color, inspired by his own experiences navigating a predominantly white industry. The article included a quote that resonated with unexpected force. "Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply claim our own dignity and refuse to compromise it, even when that means walking away from situations where that dignity is not respected." Victoria closed the browser, a complex mix of emotions washing over her. 2 years later, Captain Reynolds remained a catalyst in her life, not through any direct interaction, but as a symbol of the consequences of her actions, and the possibility of navigating life with integrity rather than entitlement. She did not know if she would ever achieve the kind of inner strength and clarity he embodied. But for perhaps the first time, she understood that it was worth aspiring to. The holiday travel season always brought a particular energy to O'Hare, a heightened blend of stress, anticipation, and festive spirit that permeated every corner of the sprawling airport. Victoria had not set foot in the terminal since leaving Horizon Rentals 14 months earlier, but today she found herself back in that familiar environment for a different purpose. Grove Community Health Center had partnered with the Airport Assistance Program, which provided support for elderly and disabled travelers navigating the overwhelming complexity of one of the nation's busiest airports. As the clinic's administrative coordinator, Victoria had volunteered to staff an information desk during the morning shift, helping direct travelers to medical services if needed, and distributing information about healthcare options for uninsured or underinsured Chicago residents. The desk was positioned near the main security exit in Terminal 3, allowing Victoria to assist arriving passengers who might require medical attention after their flights. She had been on duty for about 3 hours, helping a handful of travelers with minor issues and distributing numerous brochures when she saw him. Captain Dominic Reynolds was walking purposefully through the terminal, dressed not in his pilot's uniform, but in civilian clothes, a well-fitted charcoal sweater, dark jeans, and a camel overcoat. He was pulling a carry-on suitcase, apparently having just arrived on a flight rather than preparing to command one. Victoria's first instinct was to duck behind her desk to avoid any possibility of being recognized. But as he approached, moving in a trajectory that would bring him directly past her position, she realized two things simultaneously. He almost certainly would not recognize her, and even if he did, hiding would only compound the cowardice she had demonstrated 2 years earlier. So she remained seated, her heart pounding as he drew closer. When he was about 10 feet away, he paused, appearing to check the directional signs overhead. After a moment of consideration, he changed course and approached her desk. "Excuse me," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered it. Deep authoritative, but not intimidating. "Could you direct me to the airport chapel? I believe it is in this terminal, but I cannot seem to locate it." Victoria looked up, meeting his eyes directly. There was no flash of recognition in his gaze, no hint that he connected the middle-aged woman with silver-gray hair and modest clothing to the designer-clad socialite who had triggered the most public moment of his career. "It is in the mezzanine level," Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the surreal nature of this interaction. "Take the escalators near gate K6, then follow the signs. It is a bit hidden, but there are directional markers once you reach the upper level." "Thank you," he said with a small nod. He started to turn away, then paused. "Are you with the assistance program?" he asked, gesturing to the brochures on her desk. "Yes," Victoria confirmed. "We provide information about medical services and help coordinate assistance for travelers who might need it." "That is excellent work," he said with genuine appreciation. "I fly into O'Hare regularly, and I have noticed elderly passengers sometimes struggling to navigate. I will remember to direct them to your desk if I see anyone in need." The irony of receiving approval from Captain Reynolds of all people for her community service work was not lost on Victoria. There was a moment when she considered identifying herself, offering some kind of apology or acknowledgement of their shared history. But what would that serve beyond easing her own conscience? It would force him to revisit an unpleasant incident he had clearly moved beyond requiring him to respond to her apology in some way. It would center her feelings rather than respecting his evident peace. "Thank you," she said simply. "Safe travels." He nodded again, a small smile touching his lips, and continued on his way toward the escalator she had indicated. Victoria watched him go, his straight-backed posture and confident stride unchanged from her memory. The encounter lasted less than a minute. Captain Reynolds would likely forget it entirely before he even reached the chapel. But for Victoria, it carried the weight of a full-circle moment, not one of dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation, but of quiet acknowledgement that life continued its forward momentum for both of them in vastly different directions, but with a strange, tenuous connection neither had sought but both had been shaped by. The rest of her shift passed uneventfully, but Victoria felt subtly changed by those few moments of interaction. There had been no recognition, no judgment, no lingering resentment in Captain Reynolds' eyes, just the normal human acknowledgement one gives to a stranger providing a service. It was, in its way, a gift, the opportunity to be seen not as Victoria Blackwell viral villain, but simply as a person helping other people navigate a complicated space. Perhaps that was all redemption really looked like, not grand gestures or public rehabilitation, but the quiet opportunity to be useful, to offer something genuine to others, to occupy space in the world without causing harm. It was not dramatic or satisfying in the way of movie endings, but it was real in a way her former life, for all its glamour and influence, had never quite managed to be. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in late March, nearly 3 years after the incident that had altered the course of Victoria's life. The sender's name, Eliza Harrington Wells, caused Victoria's hand to freeze above her keyboard, her breath catching in her throat. For a long moment, she simply stared at the unopened message, afraid to read its contents, yet unable to ignore it. Finally, with trembling fingers, she clicked to open it. Mother. It has been almost 3 years since we last spoke. In that time, I have built a life here in London with James and his family. I am writing to share that you now have a grandson. William Thomas Harrington Wells was born 2 weeks ago, healthy and perfect in every way. I have attached a photo taken yesterday. James and I have discussed this at length, and we are cautiously open to reconnecting if you are willing to continue the work you have been doing. Lady Diana mentioned seeing you at O'Hare several months ago working at an information desk for a community health organization. She said you seemed different, more present, more genuine. I do not expect dramatic transformations or public declarations. I am not looking for grand gestures. What I hope for is evidence that you have truly reflected on the attitudes that led to that day at JFK, and that you are actively working to become someone who would not make those choices again. If you would like to meet your grandson, we would consider a visit this summer. James has work in Chicago in July, and we plan to accompany him. This is not forgiveness, Mother. Not yet. It is an opening, small tentative, but real. What happens next depends on both of us. Eliza attached was a photograph of a newborn with a shock of dark hair and the deep caramel skin tone that spoke to his mixed heritage. He was wrapped in a blue blanket, his tiny face peaceful in sleep. One perfect hand escaped from the swaddling to rest against his cheek. Victoria's tears fell freely as she gazed at this grandson she had not known existed until this moment. William Thomas, named for his paternal grandfather and for Thomas the father, Eliza had remained close to despite the divorce that had separated her parents. The email did not offer absolution or easy reconciliation. It presented a challenge to continue the difficult ongoing work of examining her own prejudices and changing deeply ingrained patterns. It asked for evidence, not promises, for consistency, not performative change. But it was also undeniably an opening, a possibility, a future that included family rather than isolation. Victoria composed her response with care, reading and rereading each sentence to ensure it reflected genuine feeling rather than strategic calculation. Dearest Eliza, William is beautiful. Thank you for sharing his photo and for opening this door, however tentatively. I would very much like to meet him this summer on whatever terms you feel comfortable with. The person I was 3 years ago is not someone I am proud of, but she is also not entirely who I am now. I am still learning, still working to understand how deeply my prejudices ran and how to build different patterns of thinking and behavior. I do not expect forgiveness or even full reconciliation right away. Just the chance to know my grandson and perhaps in time to rebuild some kind of relationship with you. My love always, Mom. 3 months later, Victoria booked an economy ticket on a flight to London, packing carefully in a single suitcase that contained, among other things, a small stuffed elephant purchased not from an exclusive boutique, but from a fair trade shop where Grove Community Health Center's patients often found affordable gifts for their own grandchildren. As her plane lifted off from O'Hare, Victoria looked out the window at the sprawling airport below the place where her life had unraveled and improbably begun to reform into something different. Something that, while lacking the external trappings of success she had once valued above all else, contained the seeds of something she was only now learning to recognize. Not happiness exactly, but meaning. Not power, but purpose. Not the reflected glory of status, but the quiet dignity of genuine human connection. Her journey was far from complete. The work of dismantling decades of prejudice and entitlement would likely continue for the rest of her life. But as Chicago receded beneath the clouds, Victoria Blackwell faced forward toward a future that offered not restoration of what was lost, but the possibility of building something entirely new. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this one to light. We believe that sharing these narratives can spark important conversations about privilege, accountability, and personal growth. Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone stood up against discrimination? Or perhaps you've experienced your own moment of realization about hidden biases. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Remember, change often begins with small moments of recognition and the courage to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to bringing you more thought-provoking content in the future.